A village in the mountains has been suffering constant attacks from an S-rank Fenrir, so they spent all of their savings to hire an SS-rank party to defeat it. The members of Flaming Dragon Fang are some of the strongest adventurers in the world, each with their own unique strengths. But then there's Kurt, and all he's good for is doing chores, so he's hiding behind a wall to avoid getting hurt. However, Kurt is the first person the Fenrir attacks once it arrives, so he is sent flying, and the other members of the party get ready for combat. Golnov orders Bandana to restrain the Fenrir, so she pulls out her wire and ties it up, but a second later, the Fenrir breaks her back against a wall. Normally, Bandana would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life, but with Marlefus on the team, she's healed within seconds and gets back to work. She uses a tree to anchor herself to the ground, giving Golnova an opening to aim for the Fenrir's head. So he jumps up and sets it ablaze with his magic sword. The villagers are so happy about the Fenrir's defeat that they prepare a feast for the party even though the village is almost broke, but Golnova absolutely hates this peasant food. He orders Kurt to prepare a decent meal for him instead, and Bandana asks him to make something special, because today is the last day they are going to get to eat Kurt's cooking. Kurt doesn't understand what they mean by that, so he asks Golnova for an explanation, and he tells Kurt that as of today he is being fired. Kurt doesn't understand why they are firing him, so he asks Golnova if he did something wrong, but Golnova says the problem is that Kurt isn't doing enough. Sure, he handles the party's chores for them, but aside from that, he is completely useless in combat. And parties are only allowed to have 4 members, so if they want their party to become stronger, they need to replace Kurt with a powerful mage or at least someone who can handle themselves in a fight. Kurt pleads with them to let him stay in the party, but Golnova kicks him in the stomach because he is sick of listening to Kurt's whining. They don't need him anymore, and that's final. The next day, Kurt leaves the village on his own with nowhere to go and a wallet emptier than the abyss. Kurt eventually arrives in the city of Samela, and he is down to his last few pennies, so he really needs to find a new job soon. He finds a temp work agency and decides to give it a shot, so he walks in and is greeted by the receptionist. She asks him if he is here to hire someone or to look for a job, and after Kurt tells her he is here looking for work, she informs him that she will need to conduct an interview and aptitude test. First, she asks for basic details like his name, age, and hometown, so he tells her his name is Kurt Rockens, he is 15 years old, and he is from the Hass village in the Sheen Mountains. Kilshil had no idea that there was a village up in those mountains, but moving on, she asks him what his work history was like. Kurt tells her that he was a part of Flaming Dragon Fang, but all he ever did for them was basic chores, and he was recently fired. Kilshil is surprised to hear that Kurt was part of the S-Rank party, and even if he didn't do much for them, having the party's name on his application will definitely help him find a new job. Kurt is glad to hear that, and now all he needs to do is complete the aptitude test so Kilshil can figure out what his strengths and weaknesses are. Aptitudes in this world are gifts granted by God, and if Kurt is lucky, he might discover a hidden talent today. Aptitudes are graded from G rank all the way up to triple S rank, and the difference between aptitude ranks is so great that someone with a G rank sword skill would barely be able to swing a sword, while someone with an A rank sword skill could effortlessly split a rock in half. Kurt is excited to find out if he has a talent, but unfortunately, every single combat aptitude on his sheet is rated G rank, so he has no hope of ever taking on a combat role. Kurt immediately loses all hope, but Kilshil tells him there's still a chance that he might have a good trade skill like alchemy or blacksmithing. Although the technician who handles those aptitude tests is currently on vacation, so Kurt will have to come back next week to be evaluated. Kurt tells her he won't last that long because he's one loaf of bread away from being penniless, so he really needs to find a job today. Kilshil understands Kurt's situation, so she asks him to try lifting one of those sandbags over there. Kurt gives it a shot, and as he puts his hands on the bag, he gets a strange sensation, almost like the sand drained a bit of his mana. Anyway, he lifts the bag, and since he is strong enough to do that, Kilshil thinks he should be able to handle construction work. She tells him that Margraviate of Takon is currently recruiting workers to help repair the city walls, so Kurt should be able to get a job there if she writes a letter of recommendation for him. Kurt is grateful for her help, so he immediately heads out to meet the Margrave. The Margrave sees the letter saying that Kurt wants to work here, but he honestly doesn't think Kurt looks like he can handle construction work. But then again, he needs all the hands he can get, so he decides to give Kurt a chance. He tells him to mix up some cement and use it to repair the wall, and his pay will be determined by how much work he puts in. The Margrave will be back to check on Kurt's progress later, and he tells him that he had better get to work soon, because if he hasn't used at least half a barrel of cement by the time the Margrave is back, his pay is going to be low. Kurt wants to ask a question because the Margrave never mentioned anything about pouring mana into the cement to strengthen it, but he decides to stay quiet because it's probably common knowledge. Still, He's surprised that the quota is only half a barrel of cement because that seems way too easy, so Kurt decides to use as much cement as he can before the Margrave returns. By the time the Margrave is back, he is shocked to see that Kurt has already finished an entire section of the wall. Kurt apologizes to him because he could have done more, but he ran out of cement halfway through. The Margrave is still having a hard time believing that Kurt really repaired over a third of the huge western wall, so he asks Kurt how he managed to repair the top of the wall, and Kurt explains that he just threw the cement up there and used his stick to smooth it out. Normally, the Margrave would call Kurt a liar because that sounds impossible, but Kurt clearly managed to make it work, so he has to be telling the truth. He asks Kurt how long he plans to work here, and Kurt says he just needs the job for a week, and the Margrave is glad to hear that. He tells Kurt that he has done enough work for today so he can go home now. He doesn't have enough money on him to pay Kurt for all the work he did, so he hands him a small pouch of money and promises to send him the rest through the temp agency. Kurt is amazed because even the small pouch has more money in it than he ever could have made when he was working for the hero party. Over the next few days, Kurt continues to work hard on repairing the wall, but all of a sudden, the Margrave tells him he is being fired. Kurt asks why, so the Margrave explains that the wall repairs were supposed to provide work for people in poverty, but Kurt is way too efficient, so if he keeps working here, then there will be no work left for anyone else. He isn't mad at Kurt or anything, but from what he has seen, Kurt's ability is at least double S rank, if not triple S rank, so he would be better off working on the royal capital or something. He gives Kurt a lump sum payment as compensation for being fired so suddenly and walks off. But Kurt completely misunderstood the situation and thinks the Margrave just wanted to get rid of him for being a terrible worker. He heads back to the temp agency and meets with Kilshul to tell her he got fired, and it's still going to take a few days before Kurt can have his trade attributes appraised. Just then, they hear a commotion over at the front desk, and it looks like a girl is trying to set up a recruitment ad, but the receptionist at the desk tells her that no one would agree to work under such terrible conditions with what she's offering. Even so, the girl keeps insisting that the receptionist should try to find someone, and she's starting to cause a disturbance, so Kilshul goes over to see what the problem is. Kilshul's coworker tells her that this girl wants to recruit a miner to excavate a mountain that hasn't been explored, but she is refusing to offer an upfront payment and insists on paying only if the excavation is successful. Kilshul agrees that no one in their right mind would ever agree to those terms, so she tries to convince the girl to hire investors to develop the mine. But the girl says she can't do that because if she doesn't pay the taxes by the end of the week, they'll impound her mine. Just then, Kurt walks up and says he is crazy enough to take a job like that. After all, back in his village, he used to help with the mine excavation, so he has a decent amount of experience. Kilshul asks Kurt if he is sure he wants to accept, because with the contract the girl is offering, it is entirely possible that he won't get paid at all. Before Kurt can respond, the girl cuts him off and says she was actually hoping to hire a brawny dwarf, not a helpless-looking boy, so she would feel bad making Kurt do it. However, any dwarf would require an upfront payment of at least 10 silver, and the girl doesn't have that much money to spare, so she decides to take Kurt after all. As Kurt and the girl leave, Kilshul feels bad for letting him take that job because it probably isn't worth the time. Honestly, she thinks Kurt would be better off working in a brothel because she would pay a lot of money to spend the night with him. While she's daydreaming about Kurt, her coworker gets her attention and tells her that a bank transfer just came through. Apparently, it's the remaining money the Margrave promised to send to compensate for all the work Kurt did on the wall, and Kilshul was expecting it to be something like 50 silver, but it's actually a check for 200 gold, and that's a lot of money. She is so shocked Kurt was actually able to make that much money that she accidentally stumbles over the sandbags on the floor. Her coworker comes over and tells her to be careful with those because they aren't regular sandbags. They are actually used to measure the amount of mana a person possesses, and they are supposed to get heavier when someone with a large mana reserve touches them. They usually don't react with regular people, so Kilshul is able to pick it up fairly easily, but she remembers seeing Kurt struggle a lot when he picked it up a few days ago, so she's starting to wonder if he is really just a normal kid. Meanwhile, Kurt and Ulyssia are walking into the forest to get to her campsite, but when they get there, Kurt is a little concerned because there's only one tent. Ulyssia says the tent is big enough for the two of them to sleep together, but Kurt says he'd never be able to go to sleep if he's lying next to a cute girl like her. After hearing Kurt call her cute, Ulyssia gets upset because she thinks he's just trying to flatter her, but Kurt says he really does think that Ulyssia is cute. Ulyssia realizes Kurt genuinely meant it, so she lets go and hands him a potato for dinner. It's just a basic boiled potato, but it has been so long since anyone has cooked for Kurt, so he really appreciates it. He is also grateful for the fact that Ulyssia is sitting with him to eat, because Golnova and the others from the hero party always refuse to let Kurt eat in the same room as them. Later that night, Kurt and Ulysses go to bed, but Kurt is having a hard time sleeping because Ulysses went to bed in her underwear. He will never be able to go to sleep with stiff wood, so he decides to leave the tent for the night and sleep outside. Once Kurt leaves the tent, Ulysses opens her eyes because she was just pretending to fall asleep. She intentionally went to bed in her underwear to see if Kurt was the kind of person to assault her in her sleep, but now she knows he's a good guy. The next morning, Ulysses wakes up and leaves the tent. She finds Kurt sleeping over by a tree, and she feels a little bad about making him sleep out here, but then she notices that her jacket is fixed. Kurt soon wakes up, so she asks him if he's the one who repaired her jacket, and he confirms it. She's impressed that he has so much talent for sewing, and she's starting to wonder if he is really going to be good at mining. But it's too late to find someone else, so they had better get to work. Kurt asks Ulysses if she has decided on a location to begin mining yet, but she was just going to dig in random locations and pray to find some valuable ores. Kurt tells her she'll never find anything if she searches like that, and he happens to know of a much more efficient way. He takes Ulysses to a section of the mountain, and after looking around for a bit, he finds a rock full of gemstones. Ulysses is shocked that he found it so easily, but in a matter of minutes, Kurt has located every single gemstone in this section of the mountain. Ulysses can hardly believe it because if she sells all of these gems, she'll be able to pay off her debt, but Kurt tells her she can't sell them. Ulysses realizes he's right since Kurt was the one who found all of them, so he gets to keep the money. That's not what he meant. He was just trying to tell her that the gems will be more valuable if he turns them into magic crystals first. Kurt is right about that, but Ulysses says there are only 10 mages in the entire kingdom who are skilled enough to turn gems into magic crystals. But while she was saying all that, Kurt just finished turning a gem into a magic crystal. Ulysses is too stunned to speak because not only did Kurt create a magic crystal, but he did it instantly when even the most experienced mages spend at least an hour to make a single magic crystal. After Kurt finishes turning all the gems into crystals, he agrees to let Ulysses go sell them, so she heads out while he stays behind on the mountain because he has a few things he wants to finish doing first. Ulysses heads to the city's customs agency and tells them that she wants to sell some magic crystals in the royal capital. But magic crystals are incredibly valuable, so the agent asks her where she got these. There's no way he would believe her if she told him that a random boy created them, so she flashes her royal family emblem to get him to stop asking questions. This is kind of a bluff since she stopped working for the royal family a while ago and they just forgot to take her emblem away. But it does the trick, so the customs agent allows her to use the teleportation circle to go to the capital. Once she's there, she heads to the shop of an old friend and she tells Mimiko that she has some magic gems to sell. Mimiko takes a look at them, and at first they don't seem like they'd be worth much, but upon closer inspection, she discovers that they have 10 times the normal amount of mana imbued in them, so these crystals are worth 10 gold each. Ulysses is at a loss for words because Kurt gave her 50 of these, so Mimiko casually hands her a bag of 500 gold coins. But before Ulysses leaves, Mimiko has 2 requests to make. First, she wants Ulysses to promise to only sell crystals like these at this shop because it would be a disaster if crystals that are this powerful were allowed to circulate without regulation. And secondly, she wants to know the name of the person who created the crystals. Ulysses agrees to the first condition, but she says she can't tell Mimiko the name of the crystal's creator because she'd have to ask him for permission first. Mimiko is a court mage for the royal family, so she tries using her position to order Ulysses to give up the mysterious mage's information, but Ulysses doesn't work for the royal family anymore, so she isn't obligated to obey Mimiko. Mimiko realizes she isn't going to be able to convince Ulysses to give up Kurt's information, so at least asks her to make sure he doesn't wander off to another nation. She also wants Ulysses to tell him that if he agrees to come work for the royal family, Mimiko is prepared to grant him the title of Count and full access to the Royal Research Lab and all its benefits. Ulysses then leaves Mimiko's shop, and the next morning she returns to the mountain to meet up with Kurt, but she is shocked to find that Kurt built a whole ass house in the time she was gone. Setting that aside, Ulysses explains that a friend of hers wants to hire Kurt as a royal mage. If he accepts the position, he will be treated as a noble, so he'd be guaranteed a good salary with benefits no matter what. Kurt finds it hard to believe that he is really being offered such an impressive job, but Ulysses assures him that it is a genuine offer. She asks him what he wants to do, but Kurt says he's going to decline. Ulysses can't believe that Kurt would turn it down because anyone would jump at the chance to become a royal mage, and I'm just as shocked because Kurt's reason for turning it down is stupid. He thinks he doesn't deserve to be in a position that puts him above other people, and he is still hoping to go back to being the Flaming Dragon's chore boy, even if he has to beg them to let him rejoin. Speaking of Flaming Dragon, they are getting their asses beaten by a tree monster. Goldenova can't use his fire magic for some reason, so he asks Marlefis to heal him. She's been trying to do that for a while now, but her healing magic isn't working like it usually does. Golnova asks the new guy to cast some fire magic to take down the tree, but the new guy doesn't know how to use fire magic, and that's supposed to be Golnova's job anyway. The party's chemistry is completely gone without Kurt here to hold them together, and Bandana is the only one who can tell that the party is crumbling. Back to Kurt, his current job is still to help Ulysses mine gems here, and he tells her he found a good gem vein yesterday so he can get a lot more for her. Ulysses is grateful for his enthusiasm, but she is concerned that Kurt might be tired from all the work he did yesterday. However, he tells her not to worry because he got 6 hours of sleep last night. Ulysses is shocked to hear that and starts doing some mental math to figure out how Kurt could have built an entire house and still managed to get 6 hours of sleep. But Kurt interprets this as Ulysses being mad that he slept too much, so he apologizes and says he will make up for his laziness. Ulysses really needs to explain Kurt's strength to him at some point, but she has no idea how to address it, so she and Kurt just head out to do more mining. Kurt leads Ulysses over to the spot he found, and although it looks like an ordinary forest section, Kurt tells her she should be able to find some good gems out here. Although he warns her not to dig past 500 meters, as if that's something you can do accidentally. He then starts walking away, so Ulysses asks where he is going, and Kurt explains that he is on his way to a different mining spot and he will meet back up with her later. Ulysses spends all day digging, and by evening time she has finally found a huge topaz gem. She deposited all the gold coins from the magic gems into Kurt's account because he was the one who found them. But since she found this one herself, she can use the profits to cover her taxes. She could probably even convince Kurt to turn this thing into a magic gem so she can get even more money. But she decides not to do that because she doesn't want to take advantage of Kurt's kindness. Speaking of Kurt, she decides to go see how he is doing, and from what she has seen him do so far, she knew he would go overboard, but she wasn't expecting him to have built an entire tunnel system within 8 hours. Kurt eventually comes out, and he tells Ulysses that unfortunately, he was only able to find a little bit of the gems that he was looking for. All the other stuff he found was just a bunch of useless rocks, so he plans on throwing them away once he is done here. Ulysses takes a look in the rock cart, and those rocks look a little too pretty to be worthless, so she asks him what they are. Kurt explains that those are mithril ores, but back in Kurt's village, mithril was so common in the mines that they usually just threw it away whenever they found some. Ulysses has no words for what she just heard, and aside from wanting to know what kind of village Kurt came from, she asks him what gem he was looking for if he considers mithril as trash. Kurt pulls out a small rock and tells her he has been looking for orichalcum, but he only managed to find enough to fill a small box. Orichalcum is known as the metal of the gods, so even a gram of the stuff is worth millions, and Kurt just casually found a box of the stuff. Ulysses had no idea orichalcum could even be found in places like this, but Kurt tells her you can mine it anywhere. You just need to dig 8 kilometers into the ground to get to it. Ulysses decides that's enough mining for today, and since the topaz she found will cover her taxes, her contract with Kurt is over. That means Kurt has to start looking for another job because no one has told him about the mountain of gold in his bank account yet. While he's on his way to the agency, Kurt runs into Bandana and he's glad to see her, but he asks what she's doing here. Bandana tells him she isn't a part of Flaming Dragon anymore, but there's a little more to the story than that. After their disastrous mission, Golnova went to a 5-star restaurant to get some good food, but compared to Kurt's cooking, all the food here tastes like garbage. Golnova is enraged, so he smashes the place up and storms out without paying. As he walks into an alleyway, he meets Bandana, and she tells him he went too far by destroying that restaurant. However, all Golnova cares about is getting good food, so he orders Bandana to go find Kurt and force him to come back, even if it means breaking his bones to do it. Golnova is clearly losing his mind here, so Bandana doesn't argue with him about it. She just snatched Golnova's teleportation crystal and runs out of the alley. As she leaves, she sees the city guards closing in on Golnova's location, and without his teleportation crystal, he is definitely going to be arrested for what he did at the restaurant. Additionally, Marlefus was called away by the church, so the Flaming Dragon party is officially done for. Although she leaves out most of the details about Golnova going off the deep end. Kurt is disappointed to hear that Flaming Dragon has disbanded because that means he can't rejoin it anymore, but Bandana doesn't understand why he would even want to go back in the first place. Kurt explains that he owes Golnova a lot and he is still blissfully unaware of how much of a jerk Golnova was, so he is really sad that he won't be able to work with him anymore. Bandana, on the other hand, never really cared about Golnova since he was just a cover story so she could keep an eye on Kurt. Anyway, since Kurt was on his way to the agency, Bandana thinks it's safe to assume that he is looking for a job, and if that's the case, then she has the perfect thing for him. A friend of hers has been looking for someone to help in her workshop lately, and it should be a decent gig since this friend is an atelier master. There are only a few atelier masters in the world, and they are all incredibly important, so their influence is on par with that of a viscount. Bandana asks Kurt if he wants to accept the job, and he says he'd love to. So she hands him a map and sends him on his way. Eventually, Kurt makes it to the workshop of the Atelier Master, but he is a little confused since this place looks like a regular house to him. He knocks on the door and a little elf girl answers. At first, Kurt is a little shocked because he didn't expect the Atelier Master to be such a little girl, but Michelle explains that she is actually the Master's assistant. In that case, Kurt tells her he is here for a job, and Michelle is delighted to hear that because she needs all the help she can get. She leads Kurt into the kitchen, and as soon as he sets foot in there, he smells the stench of Davy Jones' locker. Michelle apologizes for how messy this place is, but the Master has been working her non-stop, so she hasn't had a chance to really clean up yet. Just then, the Master calls for Michelle, so she runs off and asks Kurt to help her clean up the kitchen. Kurt is a little disappointed since he thought you would get to assist the Atelier Master, but chores are simple enough for him to do, so he gets to work. 30 minutes later, Kurt has cleaned the entire kitchen, and Michelle didn't really tell him what he's supposed to do next, so he starts wandering the halls looking for her. He finds a door in one of the corridors, so he knocks on it, and a girl inside tells him to come in. However, when Kurt enters, he sees the girl practically naked on her bed. He gets flustered and apologizes for the intrusion, but she doesn't seem bothered by Kurt seeing her like this. Kurt explains that he is looking for Michelle, so the girl tells him that Michelle is down in the basement. Kurt is about to leave to find Michelle, but then he notices a dark mark on the girl's belly. He recognizes it as a curse, so he asks the girl if he can take a close look at it. She gives him permission, so Kurt goes up to her and starts feeling the cursed spot. Curses like this usually destroy the internal organs around the afflicted area, so it must be incredibly difficult for the girl to eat. But it turns out that her stomach is still intact, so Kurt offers to go make her some food. Meanwhile, Ulysses meets with Mimiko to discuss the mithril and orichalcum that Kurt found. Kurt didn't even turn them into magic crystals this time, and the value is still over 50,000 gold coins, so Ulysses is starting to get concerned. She asks Mimiko what she thinks will happen if people find out about Kurt's skill, and in the best case scenario, Kurt will be kidnapped and forced into slavery. Worst case, she gets assassinated for being too much of a threat. Mimiko asks Ulysses what she plans to do with Kurt, and so far, Ulysses has been thinking of setting him up to become an Atelier Master. That way, he would have enough power that no one would be able to take advantage of him. And then she plans to work as his bodyguard, but getting Kurt to agree to all that is going to be difficult. He is too dense to realize how skilled he truly is, and worse yet, he undervalues himself constantly. So Ulysses needs to do something before Kurt gets himself in trouble. Meanwhile, Kurt has just finished cooking some porridge for the girl he met earlier when all of a sudden Michelle and the Atelier Master Ophelia come out of the basement. They are both surprised to see that the kitchen isn't a biohazard anymore, and even more so that Kurt cleaned it up in such a short time. Ophelia notices that Kurt is cooking some porridge, so Kurt explains that the girl he met in one of the rooms said she was hungry. Ophelia seems a bit concerned that Kurt met that girl, so she makes him promise not to tell anyone about her. Kurt promises, so Ophelia tells him he can go home for the day and hands him 3 silver coins. Kurt is surprised that she's paying him so much for just cleaning the kitchen, but she says he deserves it for working so hard and asks him to come back tomorrow. A little while later, Ophelia heads to the girl's room with the porridge Kurt made for her, and she reminds her that she's not supposed to let other people see her. That aside, Kurt doesn't seem like a threat, so Ophelia doesn't think she'll have to worry about him leaking the secret. Lace still hasn't eaten yet, so Ophelia asks her to wait a minute while she tests the porridge for poison. However, Lise says there's no need for that. She only spoke to Kurt for a little while, but her intuition tells her that he's a good person. And besides, there would be no point in trying to poison her when the curse has already progressed this far. She has had to live her life suspecting everyone around her, so just this once, she wants to trust someone fully. Ophelia understands, so she lets her eat the porridge, but after Lise takes her first bite, she begins sweating profusely and falls over on the floor. Ophelia thinks Kurt must have really poisoned the food after all, so she's about to go on a manhunt to kill him, but all of a sudden, Lise gets back up and says she is fine. In fact, she feels better than ever because the curse has been broken. Ophelia has no idea how to process what just happened because a curse like that isn't easy to break. Yet it was undoubtedly broken by the food Kurt cooked. At that same moment, the secret organization that placed the curse on Lise is having a meeting because they just found out that the curse was broken. They were hoping to use it to kill Lise from a safe distance, but now they are going to have to use more drastic measures. Later that evening, Ophelia and Lise head into Mimiko's shop because they have something urgent to discuss. Lise takes off her hood, and as soon as Mimiko and Ulysses see her face, they recognize her as the third princess of the nation. Ophelia explains that a powerful curse was placed on Lise in an attempt to assassinate her. They aren't sure who was behind it, but Lise is the only child between the king and Princess Francoise from the Gurumaku kingdom, So her existence is kind of like a symbol of peace between the two nations. And Selma is clearly trying to start a war. Mimiko is glad Lise is alright, but she is surprised that she managed to break such a powerful curse on her own. However, Lise tells her she didn't do it by herself. The curse was actually broken by a man named Kurt, and as soon as the two hear Kurt's name, they freak out. Ulysses is still having a hard time believing that the curse that has been plaguing Lise for years was broken by a bowl of porridge. By now, she knows that Kurt can do some crazy things, but she literally left him alone for half a day and he ended up saving the princess. They are going to reward Kurt for his help at some point, but before that, Mimiko thinks it's important that they track down the person who is responsible for the curse. There are usually anti-curse spells in Lisa's room, so someone must have tampered with them before she was cursed. There are only 3 people in the kingdom who had access to Lisa's room at the time. Son of Ariskatz, the general of the Royal Expedition Force. Tristan Maynolf, the bishop of the church at Isadora, the 3rd queen of the kingdom. However, they can't go around making false accusations, so they'll need to get some concrete evidence before they act. Ophelia suggests they should set a trap to lure out the culprit, and she already has the perfect idea in mind. Lise just turned 15 recently, so the royal customs say that she needs to leave home and train for a year. The people behind the assassination attempt will surely try to get to her again, so Ophelia plans to create a fake atelier master and say that Lise was sent there to train. The assassins will probably try to gain information on the atelier master to plan an attack, and when they do, they'll fall straight into Ophelia's trap. But they'll need to find someone with good achievements to become the fake atelier master, and Ulysses has the perfect person in mind. She shows Ophelia one of the magic crystals that Kurt made, and as soon as Ophelia sees it, she has no doubt that it is the highest quality crystal that she's ever seen. Speaking of Kurt, the next day he goes back to Ophelia's house to work, but when he gets there, he sees a note on her door saying she's not around. He then runs into Michelle, so he asks her what's going on, and Michelle explains that after he left yesterday, Ophelia suddenly went out with Lise, and they haven't been back since. Unfortunately, that means there's no work for Kurt to do today, so he leaves the house disappointed and heads over to the guild to get some food. While he is eating, he overhears a party at the table adjacent to him. They are panicking because their porter got sick, and without him, they won't be able to handle their next mission. They don't have time to start posting ads for a new porter either, so it looks like they are going to have to cancel the mission altogether. Kurt thinks about it, and he is certain that he can handle the job of a porter, so he goes over to their table and introduces himself. He says he overheard their conversation, and while he is terrible at combat, he is confident that he could be useful to their team as a porter. Stina scoffs at the idea of Kurt becoming their porter because a scrawny kid like him could never handle such hard work. Can smacks her across the head and apologizes to Kurt for his sister's rude behavior, but he also doesn't think Kurt could handle being a porter. It's a very labor-intensive job, especially since the party is after golems that weigh over 200 kilograms. However, Kurt says he can easily carry 200 kilos. In fact, to prove it, he picks up both Danzo and Cans on the spot, and he makes it look effortless even though Cans is wearing over 150 kilos of armor. Kurt has definitely proven that he is capable, so the party agrees to hire him as their porter, and while they are on their way to the mission location, they all properly introduce themselves to Kurt. Cans is the party's heavy warrior, but even though he has his sword, he usually just sticks to boxing. Meanwhile, Danzo is a samurai and Sina is a ranger. They also have one other teammate, but he is sick with a cold, which is why they needed to hire Kurt to replace him for the day. They say they are glad to have him on the team, and Kurt thanks them for giving an incompetent nobody like him a chance. They aren't sure what he's talking about since an incompetent person wouldn't be able to squat 400 kilos like it's a warm-up, but they chalk it up to Kurt's sense of humor. The group continues walking, but all of a sudden, Kurt screams because he just got attacked. All the others immediately turn around to save him, but they get confused when they see him struggling with a slime. Kurt is really freaking out, so Sina tells him to calm down because all he needs to do is destroy the slime's core to kill it. Kurt tries to follow her advice, but when he tries to stab the slime's core, his knife literally won't penetrate it, and he somehow ends up stabbing himself instead. Kurt clearly isn't going to be able to kill it on his own, so Sina takes care of the slime for him, but she's surprised by how bad Kurt is at attacking. He did mention that his fighting ability is near zero, but she didn't think it would be this bad. Kurt apologizes for being so useless, but they all tell him he doesn't have to worry about it because his job as a porter is to haul the load from the quest, so he can just leave all the fighting to them. Kurt can hardly believe what he is hearing because he just failed miserably, but his party members aren't angry at him. This is nothing like how he was treated when he was in Dragon Fang, so he is glad he managed to find such kind teammates. They eventually make it to the cave, but it's pretty dark, so Sina spreads some glow moss around to brighten things up. Once the cave is lit up, Kurt notices some poop on a rock, so he asks Sina if he should be concerned about it. Cinna tells him that the poop is from a goblin, and considering how fresh it is, there's probably a goblin nest somewhere in this cave. Kurt is panicking a little since if he can't kill a slime, there's no way he can defeat a goblin. But Cans tells him there's no need to worry since the rest of them can handle a few goblins. Although, if they run into a goblin horde, they'd stand no chance, so they need to avoid that at all costs. So they continue deeper into the cave. Eventually, they arrive at some ruins, and while walking, Kurt notices something strange about this wall. Just then, Cena spots a goblin, so she tries to kill it as fast as possible. But she was too late. The goblin already called for backup, and now they can hear a huge horde of goblins closing in on them from the front and the back. The reports didn't mention that there would be so many goblins here, and now they have nowhere to run. So Cena turns to Danzo to ask if he has a plan. But with these odds, the only thing they can do is brace themselves for a brutal death. Kurt speaks up and tells everyone that he found a secret passage in the wall here. And that's wonderful news, but even with the passage, they won't be able to outrun the goblins, so they need a distraction. Danzo and Cans nod at Cena, and she understands what they are asking her to do, so she takes Kurt into the secret room and closes the door behind him. Kurt doesn't understand why she did that since Danzo and Cans are still on the other side of the door, but this is what they wanted. Cans tells Kurt that goblins will track them down if all of them run away together, so he and Danzo are going to try to lure them away to buy Kurt and Cena a chance to escape. Kurt doesn't want to leave them behind, but Cena tells him they can't go back. She doesn't want to leave her teammates behind either, but Kurt has zero combat ability and Cena's fighting skills are average at best, so they would only slow the two of them down. Besides, she says she is sure Danzo and Cans will find a way to survive this somehow. But that was straight copium, because Danzo and Cans know they are going to die here. However, they don't regret their decision at all because dying to protect your friends is the greatest honor a warrior can have. Cena tells Kurt they need to get moving, so she spreads some glow moss in the area so she can search for an exit. But to her horror, she finds out that this isn't an ordinary secret room. It's a boss room, and now they are trapped in here with an iron dragon. Meanwhile, back in town, Lise wants to meet Kurt again, so she asks Ulysses to bring her to his inn. After Ulysses picks the lock, she and Lise enter Kurt's room, but to their surprise, he's not here. Suddenly, they hear someone's voice telling him that if they are looking for Kurt, he went on a mission in the northeastern caves. Ulysses has no idea who is speaking, so she rushes out of the room to confront this person. However, by the time she gets outside, Ben Down is gone. She is confused by what just happened, but if Kurt really is in the northeastern caves, then he might be in serious trouble. From what Ulysses knows, a training program for goblin slaying was recently held near those caves, so some of the surviving goblins might have set up a nest in that cave. Ulysses tells Lise to wait here because she's going to go help Kurt, but Lise says she wants to come too. Ulysses doesn't think that's a good idea since dragging a princess into a cave full of monsters isn't exactly safe. But Lise has been training her magic since she was a kid, so she's confident that she can defend herself. Besides, Ulysses is supposed to be guarding her, so it'd be reckless to leave her alone. Ulysses eventually agrees to take Lise with her, so the two of them head to the cave. And from the fresh glow moss on the walls, they can tell that someone was here recently. Lise casts a sensory enhancement spell on herself, and Ulysses thinks she's going to try listening for any signs of Kurt, but Lise gets on her hands and knees and starts sniffing around for Kurt. She was only around him for 10 minutes at most, but that was enough time for her to memorize his scent, and after sniffing a little more, she picks up Kurt's scent. She also hears a fight going on down this hallway, so she alerts Ulysses and gives her a stat boost so she can go help. Danzo and Cans have been putting up a good fight against the goblins for a while now, but they aren't going to last much longer at this rate. Luckily, before either of them could be mortally wounded, Ulysses dashes in and cuts all the goblins down in one strike. Meanwhile, inside the secret room, Cinna falls to her knees in defeat because there's no way she can fight a dragon golem. She apologizes to Kurt for dragging him into this mess because now both of them are going to die here, but Kurt tells her there's nothing to worry about because he has dealt with tons of these things before. He starts walking towards the dragon, and just as it is about to hit him, he jumps into the air and lands on its tail. Kurt then uses his dagger, and with a light tap, the dragon's entire tail is chopped off. He proceeds to do the same thing with all of the dragon's limbs, and Cena can hardly believe that the guy who couldn't kill a slime is defeating a dragon so easily. She's honestly kind of scared at this point, but Kurt doesn't understand why since mining golems is normal for him. Just then, Ulysses rushes into the secret room to see if Kurt is okay, and she finds him standing in front of a pile of dragon golem parts. Kurt is glad to see her here, and asks her to please save his friends because Danzo and Cans might still be in trouble. But Ulysses tells him she already saved those two, and while they may be a little injured, they are going to be fine. Now that everyone is safe, they all meet up in the secret room to discuss a few things. First, Cans and Danzo thank Ulysses for saving them since they would have died without her help, but Ulysses tells them they don't need to worry about it. More importantly, she has something to tell Kurt, so while he is carrying some of the dragon parts away, she informs him that she is opening a new atelier. She asks him if he would like to be a part of it, but Kurt doesn't think he can do it since he is currently working as part of this party. However, Cans tells him he doesn't have to worry about their party. Ulysses' offer is a great opportunity, so he encourages Kurt to accept it, and since Cans and the others are okay with it, Kurt agrees to the offer. Ulysses also mentions that she needs to hire a few adventurers to protect the atelier shop, so she asks Cans and the others if they would be willing to take on the role, and they say they would love to. And since this is such good news, Cans proposes that they should throw a party once they get back to town. And speaking of town, Ulysses reminds Kurt to get his abilities appraised once he is back at the agency because she found someone to perform the appraisal for him. A few hours later, Kurt arrives at the agency and is introduced to Mimiko. She tells him she is a royal court mage and she has heard a lot about his impressive skills, so she is here to conduct the appraisal for his non-combat skills. Once the appraisal is done, Mimiko tells Kurt that all his non-combat skills are B rank, but that was a complete lie. From the reading she got, all of Kurt's skills are triple S rank and his mana pool is larger than anything she's ever seen before. She is glad she was the one who performed the aptitude test, since it would be a national disaster if anyone ever found out how strong Kurt really is. In fact, they'd probably have to kill any witnesses on the spot, which is bad news for Kilshil, since she just heard the whole thing. The next day, the group immediately heads for the town where the atelier workshop is going to be set up. But Ulysses never specified who the new atelier master would be, so Cans is excited to meet this person. Ulysses can't exactly tell him the truth either, so she starts making up excuses on the spot. By now, Sina has already figured out that Ulysses didn't hire their party out of kindness, and she started acting strange when Cans asked about the atelier master, so Sina is getting really suspicious. As they approach the town, Kurt realizes that this is the same town whose wall he repaired, and he is still under the impression that the Margrave fired him for being a bad worker, so he is nervous about being here again. Ulysses eventually leads everyone to the location of the new atelier workshop, but calling it a workshop doesn't make any sense because this is clearly just an empty plot of land. Cans tells her they can't do anything with empty land, and Ulysses is well aware of that, so she tells them they are just going to wait in an inn until Kurt finishes building the atelier workshop. She asks Kurt if he can get it done by the end of the day, but even for Kurt, building an entire workshop in a day is totally unreasonable. Although, he could probably finish it in 3 days though. Ulysses tells him he can take as long as he wants because she doesn't want to rush him, and if he needs any extra material for the workshop, he should feel free to ask her. Kurt is happy to hear that since he already has a list of items in mind, so he writes them out and asks Ulysses to get them for him. The items on the list are things like amethyst and griffin feathers, so Sina is wondering why Kurt would need that if he's just going to build a workshop, but Ulysses knows better than to question him, so she just says she'll do her best to get the items for him. But it'll take a while to gather them, so Kurt will have to wait 2 days, and he's perfectly fine with that. Sina still can't shake her gut feeling that something is wrong here, and Ulysses is starting to catch on to her suspicion, but they both act like nothing is wrong for now. Ulysses tells everyone to head to the inn right away so Kurt can work in peace, but before they leave, she reminds Kurt that he needs to make sure he rests and eats properly, so she makes him promise to come back to the inn by nightfall. Meanwhile, once the others get to the inn, Ulysses sits them all down because she has something important to say. Till now, Cans and Danzo thought Kurt was just a regular person, but Ulysses can't keep the reality secret forever, especially since Sina has already seen some of the crazy things Kurt is capable of. Sina asks Ulysses to explain who Kurt is, but before that, Ulysses wants to introduce herself properly. She holds out her royal family crest and says she is an adventurer working for the royal family, and the lady seated across from them is Lise, the third princess of the kingdom. The three are all shocked to hear this, and Cans feels like he should stand up to greet her properly, but Lise tells him that won't be necessary. She's currently hiding her identity, so she asks them to continue treating her like an ordinary girl. Since Lise is the third princess, Sina asks if that means Kurt is royalty as well, but Ulysses informs her that he's a regular person. Okay, maybe not regular, but he's not nobility. The truth is, Ulysses still has no idea who Kurt is, but she does know that all of his combat skills are G rank, but literally every other skill he possesses is triple S rank. The three are speechless upon hearing this because triple S rank skills are practically an urban legend, but considering Kurt's capabilities, it does make sense. Ulysses says that Kurt's true skill level is currently confidential information, so none of them are allowed to talk about it. Even Kurt isn't aware of his skill level since Ulysses and Mimiko lied and told him he was only B rank. In fact, the new Atelier Master is going to be Kurt, but Ulysses has no intention of telling Kurt the truth. Sina gets up in a fit of rage and yells at Ulysses because she can't understand why she would lie to Kurt like that. Ulysses says Kurt probably wouldn't believe her even if she told him, but with all due respect, that's a dumbass reason. Ulysses tries to justify herself by saying she's just trying to keep Kurt safe, because if word of his skills were to become public knowledge, people might try to exploit him. But from what Sina can tell, Ulysses is the one exploiting Kurt right now. Ulysses doesn't have a comeback for that, so she just stays silent, and Sina turns to Cans because she doesn't want anything to do with this whole mess of an operation. After a moment, Danzo asks for a little more information, so Lise tells him that just a few days ago, Kurt broke a deadly curse that had been placed on her, and he did it with a bowl of porridge. Someone is currently after Lisa's life, which is why this whole Atelier Master scheme was concocted in the first place. The plan is to lure the assassins out and find the person behind the whole thing, but again, Kurt doesn't know any of this. It may seem selfish to drag Kurt into their plan without telling him about it, but both Lise and Ulysses really care about him, so they would never want anything bad to happen to Kurt. Lise asks them if they would be willing to keep the secret and join forces with them to ensure Kurt's safety. As adventurers, Danzo says they have no obligation to obey orders from a royal, but Kurt is their friend, so they will do anything to protect him. Cans feels the same, and Lise is glad to hear that they are on board, but Sina thinks they are going a little too far when they've only known Kurt for 2 days now. Ulysses understands how Sina feels because even though she talks about Kurt like he's an old friend, the truth is she literally met him last week and she's still having a hard time believing everything she has seen him do these past few days. Sina says she needs to take a walk to clear her mind before she makes any decisions, and while she's out, she starts walking over to Kurt's worksite, since she thinks he should know the truth about his strength. But to her utter shock, in the hours since they left, Kurt has already finished building the foundation for the workshop. She asks him if he really did all this by himself, and Kurt confirms it. He thinks this much is normal since Ulysses told him he is B-rank, but no B-rank worker could possibly have pulled this off. Kurt's understanding of ranks is totally messed up now, and it doesn't help that building a dozen houses in a day was pretty normal for the people in his village, so from Kurt's perspective, he's going a lot slower than he should be. Sina still doesn't think it's right that Ulysses is using Kurt to build the workshop, so she asks him if he is upset about having all this work dumped on his shoulders. However, Kurt tells her he has no reason to be upset because he actually enjoys doing this. Back when he was part of the hero party, they would always call him useless and even kicked him out. But here, everyone acknowledges how useful he is, and that's more than he could ever ask for. Meanwhile, Danzo is in the town square because he needs to meet with an important informant that looks a lot like Bandana. Remember how Danzo's party only hired Kurt because their porter got sick? Well, it turns out that the porter, Bibinoke, was actually a spy who joined Danzo's party with the sole intention of destroying it from within. He was apparently hired by a group of rival adventurers who were jealous of how well Danzo's party was doing. She has already tracked Bibinoke down and provided detailed directions on how to find him, so Danzo is free to use that information as he pleases. Danzo then pays her for a job well done, and later that night, he heads to a tavern. At one of the tables, there's a bald sleazebag, and he is currently sulking to himself because not only did the waitress look at him with disgust after he tried to touch her, but his plan to kill Danzo's party also failed completely. However, he already has a new plan ready to go because he received word that Danzo's party is working at an atelier workshop that has connections to the third princess, so if he targets them now, he can definitely make a lot of money. Danzo then speaks up and asks him if he's enjoying his final drink, and as soon as Bibinoke realizes that it's Danzo, he freaks out and starts running away. Bibinoke is sprinting down the alleyway, but he ends up tripping over a well-placed wire, so he falls to the ground while Danzo slowly walks closer. Danzo had initially brushed off Bibinoke's strange behavior when he called out sick for that mining mission, but now Danzo is sure that the whole thing was a setup. Bibinoke tries to pretend he has no idea what Danzo is talking about, but it's way too late for that, so Danzo draws his sword and slashes at Bibinoke's neck, but at the last second, he decides to let him live. He would rather not get blood on his hands over this, so he warns Bibinoke to stay away from him and his friends, otherwise, next time he won't be so merciful. Danzo then walks away, and from behind a corner, we see Bandana watching the whole thing. She is disappointed that Danzo didn't finish Bibinoke off because he will probably be a problem in the future, so now she has to finish him off personally. However, before she can do anything, two cloaked men suddenly show up and start carrying Bibinoke away. Bandana recognizes them as members of the Phantom Squad that operates directly under Mimiko's command. She was wondering why a royal court mage would be involved in a matter like this, but then she gets a letter from her messenger Crow. It is from her superior, and it's telling her to avoid interfering too much because this matter is under Marlefice's jurisdiction. Again, Bandown is disappointed, but she does have clear orders to leave Marlefis' operation alone, and since there's nothing left for her to do here, it's time for her to head back to Kurt's hometown. But speaking of Marlefis, things aren't looking good for her because she has been captured and is currently being held in a magic circle. Back in town, Danzo and Cans wake up the next morning and they are both beyond shocked when they see the workshop Kurt managed to build. He even had time to install trees and hedges, and I have no idea how he got them to grow in a single day. But while the others are stunned, Lise is busy fantasizing about getting married to Kurt and living here with him for the rest of her life. Just then, Kurt comes out to greet everyone and invites them in. He gives them a little tour of the house, including the main entrance, the 2 basement floors, and the water purification system he created with magic gems. He also made bedrooms for everyone and a special room for the Atelier Master, but speaking of which, Ulysses still hasn't told him who the Atelier Master is going to be. She still doesn't want to tell Kurt that he is the master here, so she makes up an excuse about the Atelier Master being busy. And then she tries to change the topic by asking Kurt where his room is, but Kurt's self-esteem is so low that he doesn't think he deserves a room since all he is good for is doing chores. He was planning to just sleep in a broom closet, but everyone immediately refuses to let that happen. They tell Kurt to just use the room that he made for the Atelier Master since no one is using it right now, but it takes a whole 2 hours for them to convince him to agree to it. On a side note, Ulysses asks Kurt if he can set up a barrier around the house to ward off curses, but Kurt has never tried making a barrier before, so he's not sure if he could do it. In that case, Ulysses is just going to have to settle for the barrier spells that Mimiko made beforehand, so she spends all night setting them up around the house. The last seal needs to go directly in front of Lisa's room, so Ulysses walks over and hang it up, but when Lisa hears footsteps outside her door, she thinks Kurt is trying to sneak into her room, so she rushes out to welcome him with open arms. But when she sees Ulysses, she is really disappointed because she was looking forward to spending the night in bed with Kurt. Ulysses tells her to stop thinking about weird things and warns Lise not to take advantage of Kurt's innocence, because with how desperate he is to be useful, if she asked him to plow her back out, he probably would. The next morning, Kurt is making breakfast for everyone when Lise comes out wearing nothing but an apron. Ulysses yells at her for trying to corrupt Kurt, but Lise says it's fine because she's actually wearing clothes underneath. Anyway, once breakfast is ready, everyone sits down to eat, and they all love the food Kurt made, but speaking of Kurt, Ulysses asks why he isn't here with them. Lise recalls hearing Kurt say he wanted to do some cleaning since someone drew graffiti all over the walls of the mansion. Ulysses immediately realizes that he was probably talking about the barrier spells that she set up, and normally, it shouldn't be possible to wipe them away with a rag, but this is Kurt we're talking about, so she rushes out to stop him. Unfortunately, she is too late because Kurt has already wiped away every single barrier spell, and he still thinks it was just regular graffiti since Ulysses never told him about the curse assassination attempt on Lise. Now Lise is completely vulnerable to curses again, and Mimiko isn't here to make new barrier spells, so Ulysses doesn't know what to do. In the meantime, Marlefis was summoned by the bishop of the church, and as soon as she meets with him, he tells her she is being excommunicated. Marlefis can't believe it and asks why this is happening, so the bishop explains that there's a lot of evidence along with complaints that the Flaming Dragon Party is violent and destructive. In fact, the bishop recently heard that Golnova is currently a wanted criminal, so the church no longer wants to be associated with Marlefis. Marlefis tries to appeal the decision, saying that she hasn't personally done anything wrong, aside from the time she had a minimum wage waiter with level 5 lightning magic out of nowhere. But in her defense, she didn't like the food he served, so the waiter totally deserved to be electrocuted to death. That excuse definitely won't work in court, but the bishop isn't exactly a good person either, so he tells Marlefis he is willing to overlook her trivial sins and maybe even grant her the rank of priest if she does one thing for him. As soon as Marlefis hears that she could be promoted to priest, her eyes go wide with excitement, so she's willing to do whatever the bishop asks of her, even if it means getting on her knees for something other than prayers. The first thing the bishop does is pour a glass of wine and ask Marlefis to drink from it, but things go in a completely different direction from what she was expecting because the bishop says he wants her to help assassinate the third princess of the kingdom. Marlefis would normally never agree to such a thing, but that wine she just drank placed a curse on her, so she is doomed to die a painful death unless she agrees to assassinate the princess. Left with no other choice, she swears to help the bishop with his plan, and that plan involves trapping Marlefis in a magic circle with a demon nearby. While all that is going on, things are still pretty normal over in Kurt's mansion. Everyone is currently enjoying a great breakfast, and for some reason, Lise hasn't had any new curses placed on her despite the fact that Kurt erased all the curse protections. Ulysses hasn't been able to figure out why yet, but since they have easy access to Kurt's magic cooking, it should be able to neutralize any curses placed on Lise. In any case, it doesn't look like she needs to worry about Lisa's safety anymore, especially since Mimiko has finally arrived in town, and with Ophelia's help, they set up an information web that will lead them to anyone who is trying to harm Lise. Lise notices that there's something different about the cake Kurt made today, so Kurt explains that he made it using rice flour instead of regular flour. Lise loves how it tastes because it reminds her of the rice porridge Kurt made for her when they first met, so she asks Kurt if he can make it for her again if she ever gets cursed. Kurt says he would be happy to make as much rice porridge as she wants, but Lise doesn't need to worry about getting cursed again. Ulysses is surprised to hear him say this, so she asks Kurt how he can be so sure when he told her he couldn't make any anti-curse barriers. Kurt confirms that he can't set up any barriers inside the house, but that's just because the entire mansion already acts as a curse barrier. That means any curse-related magic will be reflected, although Kurt tweaked it a little. By coincidence, the assassins that are after Lise have decided to cast another curse on her, so the magician begins the ritual for his ultimate curse. But instead of working as intended, the curse vanishes, and the magician is then cursed to suffer a permanent flashbang to the face. Kurt set the barrier to do that since he didn't want to accidentally kill someone with a reflected curse, even if they probably deserved it, and this was a much better option. Ulysses is once again amazed by Kurt's skill, and she's glad that Kurt is keeping Lise safe, but she really needs to go inform Ophelia and Mimiko so they can start searching for anyone who's glowing like a light bulb. Since Ulysses is going to be gone for a while, Kurt walks over to Lise and asks her if she'd like to go shopping with him. Lise is shocked that Kurt is actually asking her out on a date, but he just figured it would be nice to take a walk around the city, especially since Lise hasn't set foot outside the mansion yet. Lise thanks him for the offer, but given the circumstances, she can't go out at all. Meanwhile, on the city walls, the Margrave and his son are worried because it looks like a swarm of monsters are heading for the city, although they probably don't have to worry too much since the walls have been fully restored and their army is ready to fight any moment. At the same time, Ulysses, Mimiko, and Ophelia just found the human light bulb, but it looks like he was killed by his companions because taking him with them would draw too much attention. Still, Ulysses is surprised that the glow curse Kurt made remains active even after the target's death, and if he is capable of doing something like this on such short notice, Ophelia thinks they should just explain everything to Kurt and ask for his help since they could probably track down the assassins a lot quicker that way. But Ulysses says she doesn't want to get Kurt involved, even though she has already gotten him pretty involved by this point. Just then, they hear alarm bells ring throughout the city because the monsters have started attacking. The Margrave commands all of his soldiers to launch light spells so they can see the monsters they're up against, and to his horror, he sees a ridiculously large horde of skeletons slowly walking towards the walls. There's no way his men can fight off that many at once, so he orders a group of soldiers to stay here with him, so they can hold off the skeletons even if it costs them their lives. While the rest should focus on evacuating as many citizens as possible. The Margrave was completely ready to sacrifice himself for his people, but to his surprise, just as the skeletons reached the wall, they all suddenly started disappearing. The Margrave has no idea what's going on, but then he remembers that this section of the wall was repaired by Kurt, so he assumes he must have had something to do with this. The entire skeleton army ends up disappearing, and we cut back to Marlefis, who is still trapped in a magic circle. The bishop formed a contract with this advanced demon in order to kill the princess, and the advanced demon is forcefully using Marlefis' magic power as a battery to summon monsters. And since the first wave has already failed, he plans to keep summoning skeletons until he has completely drained Marlefis' mana and life force. Back in the city, Kurt has just heard about the monster attack, so he asks Ulysses if they are going to be okay. Ulysses tells him that the city is currently surrounded by monsters on all sides, and while the knights are doing their best to come up with a strategy to fight back, they can't do much as things are now. The only reason the city is still standing right now is because a large number of the skeletons were purified as soon as they walked into the walls. Kurt tells them he enchanted the walls when he repaired them, and stuff like this was pretty standard in his village, so be surprised that people here haven't been enchanting their walls. With that said, Kurt only got to work on 2 of the city's 4 walls, so if the skeletons end up targeting the normal walls, then they'll break through in no time. Lise does the smart thing and politely asks Kurt if he could just make a weapon that can wipe out all the skeletons, and Kurt is thinking about it, but before he could, Ulysses suddenly interrupts and says she needs to go out for a bit. And before she leaves, she reminds Kurt and Lise that they aren't allowed to leave this mansion for any reason. Lise is perfectly fine with that since it means she gets to have some alone time with Kurt, so Ulysses heads to the storage room and grabs a box full of magic crystals that Kurt made. With her secret weapon ready, Ulysses, Ophelia, and Mimiko head to the Margrave to tell him their plan. Allraid recognizes Ulysses since they are old friends, but he is surprised to see her in his city. Ulysses tells him she has a plan to stop the skeleton horde, and since they seem to be coming from some nearby ruins, She plans to go there and destroy their power source. However, to do that, she needs Alraid and his men to act as decoys and lure the skeletons away so she can get to the ruins. Alraid tells her that the plan is way too risky for him to agree to, but Ulysses assures him that she's sure it will work, especially since she has a secret weapon. She shows Alraid one of the magic crystals that Kurt made and assures him that this thing has enough power to level a building, so it'll be more than enough to destroy the ruins and stop the skeleton horde. Since Ulysses is so insistent, Alraid agrees to help her, but only on the condition that she allows him to join her on the mission. Ulysses knows Alraid is strong enough to handle it, but she asks him if he's really sure he wants to come because it's going to be very dangerous. Alraid refuses to back down because it is his duty to ensure the city's safety, and besides, while he is gone, his vice general, Generic, can command the troops in his place. And while the soldiers go out to distract the monsters, Mimiko and Ophelia can help protect the city from any further attacks. Meanwhile, back in the mansion, Kurt has just finished sweeping the garden when he starts thinking about what Lise said earlier about making a weapon. He heads towards the forge he built and starts working on something. Back in his village, the blacksmiths were always able to create such amazing weapons with ease, and while Kurt still doesn't have much confidence in his skills, he wants to be of use to his friends, so he is going to do everything he can to make a good weapon. At the same time, Ulysses and Alraid are about to head out, but there's a horde of monsters blocking the exit, so she takes out one of the magic crystals and prepares to use it. She warns all the soldiers to close their eyes, and as soon as the crystal hits the monsters, a blinding flash of light wipes them all out. Ulysses knew Kurt's crystals were powerful, but she had no idea they were capable of purifying so many monsters at once. Either way, this works out in their favor, so the soldiers head out to stall the next wave of monsters while Ulysses and Alraid head for the ruins. Back in the mansion, Kurt has just finished forging the blade, but after putting the finishing touches on it, his insecurities start getting to him. He was told that his blacksmithing skills were only B rank, so he doesn't believe a sword made by him could ever be good enough to fight monsters with. A few moments later, Lise comes looking for Kurt to ask him about dinner, but then she notices the sword in his hand and she thinks it looks really pretty. Kurt tells her she can have it if she likes it so much, but she needs to be careful since he imbued it with a lot of magic. Lise thanks Kurt for the gift, but while Kurt may be oblivious when it comes to his own skills, he knows what a forced smile looks like. There's obviously something bothering Lise, and he would be lying if he said he hadn't noticed it before, so he asks Lise if someone is targeting her. She is surprised that Kurt actually figured it out, but she admits that he's right and apologizes for all the trouble she has caused. Kurt tells her she doesn't need to apologize, but Lise feels really bad because everyone is in constant danger because of her. In fact, right now Ulysses is out risking her life for Lise's sake. Kurt may have figured out that someone is after Lise, but he still has no idea that she's a princess or that protecting her is a matter of national security. All he knows is that Ulysses went to deal with something in the ruins nearby, and he remembers a time when Golnova drew graffiti all over those ruins, so he thinks Ulysses must be fighting a graffiti artist who has been stalking Lise. He's way off the mark with his conclusion, but that doesn't change the fact that Ulysses is fighting for Lise's sake, and Kurt is absolutely powerless to help her because his combat stats are garbage. He can't stand the feeling of not being able to defend those that he cares about, and Lise feels the same way since she doesn't like the fact that people put themselves in danger for her sake. She would much rather fight to protect herself if she could, and since she brought it up, Kurt suggests that the two of them go out and catch the culprit themselves. Lise is on board with the idea, but she asks how they are going to get out of the city because it is completely surrounded by monsters right now. Kurt tells her that's not a problem since he has his ways of getting around problems like this. And all the way out on the battlefield, Ulysses suddenly gets a bad feeling that Kurt is about to do something crazy again. Back at the mansion, Lise is getting ready to head into battle when she realizes she hasn't tested the magic blade Kurt gave her yet. She's curious to find out what kind of magic it creates, so she holds it over her head, but to her surprise, nothing happens. Kurt then comes into the room to ask Lise if she's done getting ready, and when she looks at him, it's clear that the magic sword definitely did something. Meanwhile, Ulysses and Alraid are still trying to make their way through the horde of zombies. Thanks to the diversion squad, the monsters here have thinned out, but there's still a lot of them, and Ulysses has been spamming those magic crystals for a while now, so she's almost out. Just then, Alraid gets stabbed in the gut by one of the monsters, so Ulysses tries to go help him, but she gets swarmed by monsters, and she won't be able to grab a crystal in time to save herself. Luckily, at the last moment, Cans and the others show up to save her. They heard about the situation here, so as soon as they were done with their mission, they rushed back as soon as they could. They eventually find the place where all the monsters are spawning from, so Ulysses uses one of the magic crystals to wipe out all the monsters in the area so they can get to the entrance of the building. Ulysses hands Alraid some of Kurt's healing soup so he can recover from his wound, and once he is back to full health, she prepares to head in. More monsters have started coming out of the building, but Cans and the others still handle it, so Ulyssia and Alraid can go in without them. Meanwhile, in the depths of the ruins, Marlefis is still being drained of her mana, and at this rate, she's bound to die sooner or later, but the demon couldn't care less. However, he doesn't care about the fact that the humans are holding their ground against the monsters, as they are doing a lot better than he expected them to. He's especially impressed by Ulyssia and Alraid since they've already made their way into the ruins, so he decides to go deal with them personally. While running down the halls, Ulyssia and Alraid eventually come across the spawning ground for the zombie, so she throws one of Kurt's magic crystals down and it completely wipes them out along with whatever spell that was being used to summon them. Ulyssia is honestly surprised that things worked out so well, but it's never that simple because the demon appears in front of them a few moments later and now they have to deal with it. Ulyssia charges forward and uses one of the magic crystals as a weapon against the demon, but while the crystal's power definitely hit, it didn't do anything because according to the demon, it has infinite HP. Alraid doesn't believe it, so he tries slashing the demon across the stomach, but it has no effect at all. The wound on the demon closes up almost instantly, but not because the demon has infinite HP, it's because he's using Marlefis' mana to heal himself, and it's draining a lot from her. The demon tells Alraid and Ulyssia that they are pretty good compared to most humans it has faced, but ultimately they are no match for him, and the same goes for all their friends fighting outside. They are all so desperate to protect the city, but eventually they are going to die at the hands of a legion of zombies. Alraid asserts that none of his men will lose to some mere monster, but the demon says he can always just summon more until they are overwhelmed. Even the three fighting outside the ruins wouldn't stand a chance against the next wave the demon sends out, but Ulyssia and Alraid refuse to let that happen. They both attack at once and Ulyssia cuts the demon's head off, while Alraid stabs it in the heart, but the demon just casually picks his head back up and keeps talking. He says he will slaughter all the knights and then go after the princess, but just for fun, he might keep Ulyssia and Alraid alive so they can watch as Lys dies a painful death. Ulyssia doesn't want to let that happen, but she's not sure what she's supposed to do in this situation because none of her attacks are working and even Kurt's magic crystals weren't enough to kill the demon. Meanwhile, Marlefis has accepted her fate because she has already lost so much strength that she wouldn't be able to run even if she could get out of this magic circle. Plus, because of that curse that the bishop placed on her, she hasn't eaten anything for days, so she is hungrier than she has ever been. She wishes she could taste Kurt's cooking one last time before she dies, and she even starts hallucinating because she could swear that she is hearing Kurt's voice right now. But it's not a hallucination because Kurt and Lys just dubbed their way into the chamber. Marlefis is just as surprised to see Kurt here and even more, so they brought the princess along with him. She thinks Kurt must have figured out that she is involved in the plot to assassinate Lys, so he brought the princess here in an attempt to bear witness. But Kurt had no idea that Marlefis was here before he showed up. Kurt asks Marlefis if she's the one who has been targeting Lys, but Marlefis explains that she was excommunicated from the church and tricked into this by Bishop Tristan. Kurt and Lys heard what she said, but they are on two completely different wavelengths. Lys realizes that Tristan must be the one behind all the assassination attempts on her, while Kurt thinks Marlefis must be drawing graffiti everywhere because she's frustrated about being excommunicated. Marlefis has no idea what Kurt is talking about, and neither does Lys, but she supports whatever Kurt says regardless of whether it makes sense or not. Kurt asks Marlefis if she knows where Ulyssia is, and Marlefis has no idea who Ulyssia is, but she does remember seeing two adventurers on their way here, so they should be on the next floor up from this one. Kurt thanks her for the directions and turns to go find Ulyssia, fully prepared to leave Marlefis behind because he thinks the magic circle is just graffiti. However, Lys asks him to help clean up the magic circle while she goes to find Ulyssia instead. Kurt tries to stop her since it would be dangerous for her to go alone, but she reminds him that he gave her a magic sword, so she's going to be fine on her own. Kurt eventually agrees to let her go, and while Lys is gone, he somehow manages to find a mop and bucket and gets ready to start cleaning. Marlefis thinks he's insane because there's no way you can destroy a magic circle with regular water and a mop, but Kurt is too dense to understand what impossible means, so he casually wipes the magic circle away. As soon as the magic circle is broken, the demon realizes his supply of mana has been cut off, so he can't afford to take any more hits and dodges Ulyssia and Alraid as they attack. Neither of them knows what's going on, but the fact that the demon dodged their attacks means he must be scared of getting hurt now. Ulyssia reaches for the last magic crystal in her bag so they can finally defeat it, but the demon knocks it out of her hand before she could use it, and without that crystal, their chances of winning are slim. The demon is about to start taking the fight seriously, but all of a sudden, Lys shows up and calls out to Ulyssia. Lys has been the demon's target from the beginning, so it stabs her to death on sight and begins laughing about how foolish it was for her to come here on her own. However, to his surprise, Lisa's body disintegrates into butterflies, and she reveals that it was just a clone. The demon can't believe it since it could have sworn that it stabbed the real Lise. But that was just an illusion created by the Sword of Confusion. As the name implies, it creates illusions that can confuse anyone, whether it is showing you an incoherent compilation of brain rot or, in this case, a perfect duplicate of Lise. The demon tries killing Lise a few more times, but every time it hits her, it turns out to be an illusion. And while the demon was busy with all the illusions, the real Lise managed to make her way over to the magic crystal that Ulysses dropped. She then smashes it, and the resulting burst of energy wipes the demon out. And since the demon was the one who summoned all the zombies, now that he's gone, all the monsters vanish as well. The crisis is finally over and everyone in the city can rest easy knowing that they are safe. But Ulysses is mad at Lise for putting herself in harm's way like that. Lise apologizes for coming here without permission, but she didn't want to continue hiding away while others fought for her sake. Ulysses is still mad, but she has no right to be angry at Lise because if she hadn't shown up when she did, that demon would have killed her and Alraid. Alraid wants to personally thank Lise for saving him, but she tells him it's not necessary because he fought even harder than she did. She thanks him for all his hard work in defending the city and promises to give him a reward for his brave actions. Meanwhile, Kurt has just finished wiping away the last of the magic circle. But with the circle gone, Marlefist's curse still prevents her from eating any food, so sooner or later she's going to starve to death. Just then, Kurt offers her some of his lunch because he can tell that she's hungry and Marlefist appreciates the gesture. But if she eats this, her curse will just force her to vomit it out. Even so, she still decides to eat it so she can enjoy the taste of Kurt's food one last time before she dies. However, as she takes a bite, she realizes she is able to eat it normally, and a few moments later, the curse on her stomach is dispelled. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Kurt's food is what cured her, but this is the first time Marlefist has ever realized what Kurt is truly capable of. She now thinks back to all the things Kurt used to do for her and the rest of Flaming Dragon, and it finally clicks that the only reason their party was strong was because they had Kurt supporting them, so she sincerely apologizes for how she treated him. Don't get me wrong, Marlefist is still a terrible person, but at least she acknowledges Kurt's strength now, and that has to count for something. Although it's not enough to stop her from getting arrested because two of Mimiko's agents show up to apprehend Marlefist for her connection to this whole assassination plot. Marlefist tries calling out to Kurt for help, so Kurt promises to visit her in jail as much as she wants. After Marlefist is dragged off to jail, Lise comes up to Kurt to ask if he's alright. Kurt tells her he's fine, and if anything he's more worried about Ulysses and the others that were fighting, but Lise assures him they are fine since they all drank some of the medicine soup Kurt made. Once everyone returns from the battlefield, Kurt invites them all to a feast at the mansion, but after they all sit down to eat, all the soldiers just sit in silence and stuff their faces with food. Kurt is starting to get worried that the soldiers are forcing themselves to eat the food out of politeness because they don't seem happy at all, but Alraid tells him he's got it all wrong. They are all silent because this food is the best thing they've ever tasted, so they are focusing on eating as much food as humanly possible. Kurt is glad that they all like his food, and while everyone else keeps eating, Lise calls Alraid over to formally introduce him to Kurt. Kurt recognizes him as the site foreman from the time that he repaired the city walls, but Lise informs him that Alraid is also in charge of governing this city and all its people. Just then, a bunch of fireworks go off, and everyone is amazed by the spectacular sight. Kurt explains that he thought it would be nice to have a show to go with the food, so he prepared some fireworks in advance. But speaking of the food, Alraid mentions that all his injuries were suddenly healed after he ate the food, but Kurt doesn't understand what the big deal is since it was always normal for you to heal after having a good meal back in his village. 10 years ago, back when Kurt still lived in his home village Hast, there was a merchant who came to do business there. For various reasons, people don't usually visit Hast, so Kurt rarely got to meet new people, and the merchant happened to have a daughter around his age, so he wanted to talk to her. He approaches Hildegard and tries to start a conversation, but she completely ignores him and continues carving her wood. Kurt keeps trying and even compliments her pretty horns, but nothing he does is enough to get her attention, so Kurt is on the verge of tears. Hildegard feels bad now, so she apologizes and tells Kurt that her father told her not to talk to any of the villagers here in Hast, because according to him, they're a bunch of weirdos. But Kurt doesn't seem weird to get, so she'd love to play with him. Kurt is excited that he finally has a new friend, and both of them get along really well. So they end up taking a golem ride out into the forest so Kurt can show Hildegard some pretty flowers. Hildegard is excited, so once she gets down from the golem, she runs out ahead of Kurt. She then spots some colorful berries growing nearby, and against better judgment, she grabs a fistful and eats them without knowing what they are. A few seconds later, she realizes something was wrong with the berries, but it's already too late. The berries have entered her system, and she falls to the floor unconscious. Kurt rushes over to check on her, and he immediately recognizes the poisonous parpla berries that Hildy ate, and it's only a matter of time before she dies from the poison. Luckily, Kurt knows how to make a cure, so he grabs a nearby flower and starts making the medicine. However, in Hildy's current state, there's no way she could drink it on her own, so Kurt puts the medicine in his mouth and prepares to feed it to her himself. Back to the present, Ulysses wakes Kurt up because they are approaching the village that requested their help. Basically, the chief of the village says they are on the verge of dying of thirst because their water reserves are practically gone. He says they won't survive another week like this, but according to the map that Ulysses has, the neighboring village should have a large aqueduct on their land. So she tells the chief to just ask Village B to share some of their water with them. However, the chief says he already tried that and Village B's chief refused to give them any water at all. That's why he called Ulysses, hoping that with her connection to the new layer, she could force Village B to share their water. Ulysses doesn't like the idea of forcing people to do stuff, but she agrees to go to Village B to see if she can negotiate a water seal with them. She then heads back to the others to fill them in on how things are going, but everyone aside from Danzo already left. Ulysses asks him where the others went, so Danzo explains that the others went to the top of that hill to look at some birds. If they are off having fun, then Ulysses has no intention of boring them with negotiations, so she gets on a horse and starts heading out to Village B. However, to her shock, when she gets there, the chief of Village B tells her that the aqueduct is empty as well, and she begs Ulysses for help because her villagers will die of thirst soon at this rate. Ulysses doesn't know what to do at this point because if all the water reserves are empty, then there's nothing to do but pray for rain. Just then, a couple of the villagers come running over because they have urgent news regarding the hill. Ulysses knows that's where Kurt and the others were playing, so she rushes over to see what's going on. And to her utter shock, she finds an entire lake just sitting there. She is really confused because why would Village A and B be complaining of a water shortage when there's a lake right here, but Cans and Cena tell Ulysses that the lake wasn't here a few minutes ago. Just then, Kurt comes running up and she's been around him enough to know that he must have had something to do with this. Kurt was initially just here to watch the birds, but then he noticed that the birds seemed thirsty, so he decided to get them some water and dug down into an aquifer to create this lake. Simple. But enough about him. He wants to know if Ulysses is done helping the village chief, but before she could answer, the chiefs of villages A and B begin thanking Ulysses because they believe she is the one who made the lake. Ulysses tries to explain that she didn't do this, but those two are too busy being grateful to hear her. As thanks, the village chiefs gave Ulysses and the others a basket of eggs to take home with them, and Kurt is already thinking of all the amazing food he can make for everyone. However, Lise isn't home right now because she has to go with Alraid to give a report on the monster attack to Lord Tycoon. Over in Tycoon's palace, after inviting Lise and Alraid inside, he sits down to have some tea with them. Tycoon has authority equal to that of a duke, but it's no secret that a majority of his power comes from his connections. That's why he's trying so hard to please Lise, because he wants to further solidify his connection to the royal family. But Lise has already seen through his fake kindness. Tycoon mentions that he heard rumors that during the battle, there were special magic crystals powerful enough to wipe out all monsters within a 500-meter radius. And that's true, but Lise tells him the crystals weren't really powerful. She's trying to keep Kurt's skill hidden so Tycoon doesn't get any ideas about using him for personal benefit. She's already made plans to shut down all of Tycoon's attempts to meet the Atelier Master, but she is completely stunned when Tycoon says he is thinking about appointing the Atelier Master as Viceroy of the city. Lise realizes that if Kurt were to be appointed as the Viceroy of the city, then he would have to make a public appearance. But right now, Kurt doesn't even know he is the Atelier Master, so explaining all this to him would be difficult. Lise tries to get out of this by saying she can't make decisions on the Atelier Master's behalf. Tycoon calls BS because she is literally here on behalf of the Atelier Master, so she should be able to give a response. Additionally, Tycoon is sure that the Knights would be happy to have the Atelier Master as the new leader of their town, and as Knight Captain and acting leader, Tycoon turns to Alraid for approval. Lise is starting to panic because Alraid doesn't know that Kurt is the Atelier Master, and if he approves of the new appointment, then she won't be able to weasel her way out of this anymore. She silently prays for Alraid to postpone the decision, but Alraid enthusiastically states that he would gladly welcome the Atelier Master as the new Viceroy of the city. Lise desperately tries to back out of this, but then Tycoon asks her if she thinks the Atelier Master is too incompetent to run a city, and her love for Kurt gets the better of her from there because she starts talking about how the Atelier Master is the most competent person on the planet and how it would be easy for him to run the city. A few moments later, Lise realizes that she messed up because she just agreed to have Kurt become the new Viceroy of the city, and she has no idea what to do. She later meets with Ulysses to explain everything that happened, and fixing this isn't going to be easy. Ulysses asks if they can just find someone to pretend to be Atelier Master, but Lise doesn't think that would be possible because no random person would have enough skill to do what Kurt does. And speaking of Kurt, Lise hasn't seen him all day, so she asks Ulysses if she knows where he is. Ulysses tells Lise that Kurt is busy raising a child, and Lise starts freaking out because she had no idea Kurt had a child. She is also disappointed that she isn't the mother of Kurt's child, so she immediately starts making plans to adopt the child as her own. However, Ulysses tells her she is misunderstanding the situation. Apparently, one of the eggs they got from the village was fertile, so Kurt decided to take care of them until they hatch. But knowing Kurt, she wouldn't be surprised if he raised a chicken that lays golden eggs. Just then, Kurt calls Ulysses' name and tells her that his egg just hatched, but when she goes to check it out, she is shocked to see that Kurt somehow made himself a daughter. There's a lot to unpack here, but basically, Kurt was just taking care of the egg, and eventually this little girl came out. And she's already calling Kurt Papa, so he's pretty much her father now, and Kurt seems pretty happy about it. However, Ulysses has a different opinion. She points out that humans don't come from eggs, so even if Kurt is willing to accept her as his daughter, he can't pretend that she's a regular person. More likely than not, she's a special kind of monster, and the fact that she looks similar to Kurt must be some kind of trick to make him let his guard down. Kurt understands what Ulysses is implying here, so he asks her if she really thinks his daughter is going to kill him. Ulysses doesn't answer him, but she tells Kurt to hand the girl over immediately. Kurt asks what she intends to do with her, and Ulysses bluntly answers that she's going to kill the girl for everyone's sake. Kurt refuses to let that happen, so he promises that he won't let the girl hurt anyone, but Ulysses refuses to listen to him and drags her out of his arms. However, before Ulysses could do anything to her, the baby grabbed her face and called her mama. Instantly, every neuron in Ulysses' brain lights up, and she begins imagining a life as a happy family with Kurt. But Lise can sense that Ulysses is thinking about her man right now, so she snatches the girl away to snap her out of it. Then the girl calls Lise mama as well, and she practically melts with joy at the thought of being a parent with Kurt. Ulysses tries to fight against the cuteness and insists that the girl might be dangerous, but Cam stops her and says they don't need to make any hasty decisions right now. The girl is still young, and if she is raised by caring people like them, there's no way she could turn out evil. Everyone says they want to take the girl in, and honestly, after imagining a future with that child, Ulysses can't bring herself to kill her anymore, so she agrees to let her stay. Now that they've all decided that they're keeping the girl, Lise says they should come up with a name for her, so everyone sits down to think of one. Kurt thinks they should call her Akuri because in the language of the Laplace civilization, it is a name that symbolizes the connection between points. Both Ulysses and Lise seem to like the name, and so does the girl, so from now on she will be called Akuri. Later that night, Yuri is sleeping on the sofa with Akuri on top of her, but while she agreed to keep her, that doesn't mean she isn't suspicious about the child's origins. One of Mimiko's agents approaches her, and Ulysses hands over an envelope containing samples of Akuri's hair and saliva. And once Mimiko receives the samples, she can analyze them to figure out what Akuri is. The next morning, Kurt and Ulysses show Akuri the playroom that Kurt made for her, but in reality, this is meant to be a prison to hold her, until Mimiko finishes running the tests. It has no windows, and the walls are reinforced with mithril, so there's no way she can escape the room on her own. Ulysses feels bad for asking Kurt to make this since it seems a little harsh to isolate a child from the world, but this is only a temporary measure until they are sure that Akuri isn't a threat. For now, they plan to leave Sina to play with her while she and Kurt finish up one more request. But as soon as Akuri hears that Kurt and Ulysses are leaving, she stops playing and says she wants to go with them. Kurt tells Akuri that she can't come because they are going on a mission, but he promises that as soon as he is done, he will come back to play with her, and Akuri seems to accept that. While Kurt and Ulysses are riding to the village that requested help, Ulysses can tell that Kurt is upset about leaving Akuri behind, so she tells him they should focus on completing the request as soon as possible so they can see Akuri again. But just then, they hear a voice coming from inside the carriage. Kurt and Ulysses stop so they can see what it is, and to their surprise, it turns out to be Akuri. Neither of them has any idea how she managed to escape the room because a child-friendly prison made by Kurt should be impenetrable, but Kurt just assumes he must have made a mistake somehow. Just then, Ulysses notices one of Mimiko's agents nearby in disguise, so she makes up an excuse to go talk to them, leaving Kurt and Akuri alone. While she's gone, Kurt thinks back to what Ulysses said about Akuri potentially being a dangerous monster. He thinks he is being selfish for wanting to keep her because if Akuri really did end up attacking people, he would be powerless to stop her. Ulysses returns shortly after, and she can tell what Kurt is thinking, but she assures him that what he did wasn't wrong. There's still the possibility that Akuri turns into a threat in the future, but right now she's harmless, so it's their job as parents to make sure they raise her well so she grows up to be a good girl. Just then, out of nowhere, a man shows up and says he has been waiting for a while now because he needs the two of them to defeat the Demon King and save the world. He may just be crazy, but who knows? Kurt and Akuri decide to just go with it and promise to defeat the Demon King, but Ulysses tells them they didn't sign up to fight any demons today. Just then, a woman walks up and apologizes for her father's behavior. She tells them this man is her father and he is going a bit senile, so he sometimes says strange things. She was the one who made the request, but she is surprised that a newly couple showed up to fulfill it. Kurt and Ulysses get flustered since with Akuri here, they really do look like a happy family, and it doesn't help that Akuri calls them Papa and Mama. Kurt doesn't mind the misunderstanding that much, but Ulysses has been frozen in place ever since the client mistook her for Kurt's wife. Kurt assumes Ulysses might be upset at the idea of being married to him, but clearing up the misunderstanding would take too long, so Kurt decides to do his best to finish the job quickly so he and Ulysses can leave. He asks the client to tell him what the problem is, so she explains that her pigs haven't been eating their food lately, and she doesn't know what to do. The weather has been pretty hot lately, so Kurt assumes the pigs are suffering from heat exhaustion, making them too tired to eat. Kurt says he can whip up some food that will cure the pigs' heat exhaustion, and the client is very thankful. She leaves so Kurt can get to work, but then Kurt notices that Ulysses still hasn't moved from that spot. He wonders if she's still upset about the misunderstanding earlier, but in reality her brain is just buffering from the joy of being called Kurt's wife. Of course, Kurt has no idea she's actually happy about it, so he decides to give Ulysses some space and starts working on making the feed for the pigs. It only takes him a few minutes to make it, and by the time the pigs start eating, Ulysses' brain is finally finished processing her emotions. She begins thinking that if the client mistook her for Kurt's wife, then that must mean they look good together, so maybe she can really get married to Kurt one day. But she cuts herself off mid-thought because she's going too deep into the fantasy rabbit hole. She tries to convince herself that she doesn't want a relationship with Kurt, but every time she looks at him, her heart begins to ache, so she might be in love. Just then, a dragon flies overhead and Ulysses sees that it's heading straight for Kurt and Akuri, so she runs out to try and save them. However, Kurt tells Ulysses to put her sword away because the dragon isn't a threat. Ulysses listens to Kurt and stops in her tracks, but when she sees the dragon get close to Akuri, she thinks it's about to eat her. However, the dragon just wanted to eat some of the feed that Kurt made. Ulysses is really confused now, but Kurt says this is perfectly normal since back in his village, dragons would stop by all the time to get a share of the feed. Ulysses tells him that isn't normal at all, but there's no point in pointing it out every time Kurt does something crazy. That aside, Ulysses suddenly starts smelling blood nearby, so she goes to investigate and the scent leads her to a nearby vineyard. There she finds one of Mimiko's agents heavily wounded on the floor, and this one was in charge of guarding Kurt at all times, so Ulysses wonders who could have done this to her. She goes to investigate and spots someone hiding behind the vines, so she draws her sword and attacks. Kurt hears a commotion, so he walks over to see what's going on, and to his surprise, a woman pops out and demands that he hand over the child. Ulysses gets in front of Kurt to defend him, and Kurt assumes the woman must be a dragon hunter who is after the dragon that just showed up, but Ulysses thinks it's more serious than that. For now, she tells Kurt to get out of here for his own safety, but before Kurt even gets a chance to respond, the dragon grabs him and flies away. Ulysses is now free to fight the hunter at full strength, but honestly, she's getting manhandled. The hunter knocks her to the ground and is about to finish Ulysses off, but at the last second, she's able to defend herself with a rake and backs away. Ulysses asks the hunter what she's after, but the hunter sees no reason to explain her motive to someone who will be dead soon. She then lunges forward, and despite Ulysses' best attempt to block the attack, she still gets slashed across the stomach. Ulysses falls to the ground and the hunter slowly walks up to her to land the finishing blow, but before she could strike, Ulysses throws one of Kurt's magic crystals at the hunter, resulting in a massive explosion. Ulysses assumed the explosion would be enough to finish the hunter off, but to her surprise, the hunter is perfectly fine and she has just sprouted demon horns. Ulysses is shocked because it has been over a century since a true demon revealed itself willingly, so why would one show up now? The demon is surprised that Ulysses was able to do enough damage to dispel its human transformation, but this is to be expected from the people who defeated a lesser demon lord. Upon hearing the demon say this, Ulysses realizes that it must have been keeping tabs since before the lesser demon's attack, so the child was trying to kidnap might have been Kurt. Fortunately, Kurt is already a safe distance away, but Ulysses has no hope of defeating the demon because she has already used up all her weapons. The best she can do now is sacrifice herself to buy him some more time for Kurt to escape, but a few moments later she sees Kurt flying straight towards her on the dragon's back. She can't believe Kurt would do something so stupid because even if the dragon has good combat abilities, Kurt is absolutely useless in a fight, and it doesn't help that he accidentally flings himself off the dragon's back and into a tree. Ulysses runs up to Kurt and yells at him for coming back when he stands no chance of beating the demon, but Kurt is well aware of his weakness. He knows the best choice here is to escape, but he refuses to abandon a friend, which is why he hid Akuri in a safe place and came back to save Ulysses. Just then, a group of pigs come running in their direction, and this is all part of Kurt's plan. So as the stampede gets to them, Kurt grabs Ulysses and jumps on the back of one of the pigs. Ulysses asks him if this is something he normally did in his hometown, but this is actually the first time Kurt has done something like this. He knew it was a reckless idea, but he is willing to risk his safety if it means protecting someone precious to him. However, before they could escape, the demon launches a massive fireball at them and decimates the stampeding pigs. Kurt and Ulysses are thrown to the floor, and the demon is closing in on them, so Ulysses needs to do something. She asks Kurt to let her borrow his dagger, and Kurt is worried that she might get herself hurt, but Ulysses assures him that she isn't trying to sacrifice herself again. She promises to do her best to survive, so as the demon launches another fireball at her, she raises the dagger to defend herself. The only way she can survive this is to use the secret spell Slash technique, a technique that allows one to destroy a spell by cutting through its magic. However, while Ulysses has attempted it many times, she has never successfully pulled it off before, and the power of plot armor is not on her side today because she isn't able to destroy the spell yet again. It looks like this is the end of the road for Ulysses, but at the last second, Akuri appears out of nowhere and hugs her. The fireball suddenly disperses, but not because of anything Ulysses did. Instead, the demon dispelled it on her own because she didn't want to hurt Akuri. Ulysses realizes that the demon must be after Akuri, and it must care about her a lot and is going this far to get to her. Ulysses tries to ask the demon some questions, but before she could say anything, the demon's injuries start to catch up to it, so she runs away. A few moments later, Ulysses collapses from her own injuries, so Kurt rushes to her side and prepares to give her some medicine. Thankfully, Ulysses' injuries weren't fatal, so she's going to live, and Akuri pats her face to cheer her up. Ulysses appreciates the gesture, but then she remembers that Akuri isn't supposed to be here in the first place, so she freaks out and asks how she got here. Kurt tells her that he's sure he left Akuri in a safe place, but Akuri just popped out of thin air next to Ulysses when she was about to get blasted. That sounds an awful lot like teleportation, and it's not like teleportation is a rare thing, but it always requires the use of a teleportation magic stone. So if Akuri is capable of teleporting without a teleportation stone, that would be a really significant development. She asks Akuri to demonstrate how she got here again, and Akuri gives it a try, but for some reason it isn't working. So she eventually gives up and says she can't do it. Ulysses asks why, since Akuri was able to teleport over a long distance earlier, but before Akuri could respond, one of the pigs comes over, and Kurt and Ulysses suddenly recall that all the client's pigs got roasted during Kurt's rescue mission, and she definitely won't be happy if she sees this, so Kurt says he will heal them immediately and round them back into their pig pens. By the time the client returns, she is pleased to see that all her pigs look happier than they've ever been. She wants to express her deepest gratitude for the help she has received, but then she notices that Kurt isn't here, so she asks Ulysses where her husband went. Ulysses freaks out a little from being called Kurt's wife again, but she regains her composure and tells the client that Kurt went to visit one of the neighboring farms. Kurt is currently riding the dragon on his way to that farm, but along the way, the dragon notices something on the ground, so they take a quick detour. Meanwhile, Ulysses and Akuri start heading home in their carriage. Ulysses is glad that Akuri is safe, but she is still wondering why the demon from earlier canceled her spell before it hit. Ulysses recalls the demon panicking when it saw Akuri, so she might have canceled the spell to avoid hitting Akuri, but Ulysses is going to need more information before she can draw any conclusions. She also has to worry about the possibility that Akuri can use teleportation magic at will, but that's a problem for another day, so she decides to just appreciate the fact that she's alive for now. A few moments later, Ulysses hears Kurt calling out to her, so she stops the carriage and waits for him to land. She is wondering why Kurt didn't just go straight home. Then she sees the unconscious demon on the dragon's back, and she has a ton of questions. Kurt explains that while he was riding the dragon, it spotted something, so they went down into the forest to investigate, and after searching for a bit, Kurt found the demon lady unconscious on the ground from the injuries that Ulysses inflicted. At first, Kurt didn't know what to do because he would like to treat the demon's wounds so she can survive, but at the same time, the demon could still be dangerous. Eventually, he decides to go through with saving its life, so he sets up a little fire so he can start brewing some medicine. The demon regained consciousness at one point, but she still couldn't move, so she asks Kurt what he is doing. Kurt explains that he is making medicine for her, but she calls him a fool for showing mercy to an enemy. However, Kurt knows the demon could have killed Ulysses and Akuri if her spell had connected, but she chose to spare their lives, and that's good enough of a reason for Kurt to save her. Kurt finishes making the medicine and tosses it over to the demon. At first, she refuses to take it, but Kurt reminds her that she will die if she stays the way she is now, so she eventually takes the bottle, flips over onto her back, and drinks the medicine. However, as soon as it goes down her throat, she can tell that something is wrong. Her wounds are healing, but now she can't move her body anymore, and that's because Kurt mixed a paralyzing drug into the medicine. He may want to save her, but he isn't naive enough to believe that an enemy won't attack him. That was great foresight on Kurt's part, but he still believes the demon is just a dragon hunter, so his situational awareness unfortunately hasn't improved. He wishes they could get along like he did with Hildegard back when he was little, and as soon as the demon hears him mention Hildegard's name, she starts reaching for Kurt, but the drug eventually knocks her out. That leads us back to the present, and it explains how Kurt managed to capture the demon, but Ulysses wonders what kind of drug Kurt made because demons are supposed to be immune to all poisons. They eventually return to the mansion, and Ulysses can't believe she's about to carry an unconscious demon into the house. Meanwhile, Kurt tells Akuri that she has to apologize to Sina because she was probably worried sick by Akuri's sudden disappearance. Once Sina and Lise realize that Akuri is back, they rush outside and hug her because they thought something bad had happened to her. A few moments later, a man walks out of the mansion as well, but Ulysses has never seen him before, so Lise introduces him as the new atelier. The man introduces himself as Rikudo, and Kurt immediately believes that he's an atelier master, so he walks up to introduce himself. However, Ulysses knows something is wrong because Kurt is the real atelier master, so this guy must be a phony. She asks Kurt to go inside and start making dinner while she handles all the luggage, and as soon as Kurt is gone, she tries talking to Rikudo, but he suddenly pushes her against the carriage. She still has no idea who this guy is, but it's clear he's crossed a line, so she instinctively aims a sharp kick at his midsection. However, her leg goes right through Rikudo's body. Ulysses then sees Lise smiling behind Rikudo, and she finally puts it all together. Rikudo is an illusion that Lise created using the sword Kurt made, but Ulysses had no idea the sword could create illusions of people who don't exist. However, Lise tells her that Rikudo is actually based on a grown-up version of Kurt. Lise dispels the illusion for now, and a second later, a note from Mimiko falls from the sky. Ulysses grabs it, and she gets excited because Mimiko says she's done with the analysis of Akuri's DNA, and she'll be here in 3 days to give a report. The days go by, and Mimiko finally arrives. Everyone is nervous to hear what she has to say about Akuri, but Mimiko simply tells them she has no idea what Akuri is. Ulysses asks why Mimiko even bothered coming here if she's just going to say she doesn't know, but there's a little more to the story. When she analyzed the sample of Akuri's hair that Ulysses sent in, it looked identical to that of a regular human. However, when Mimiko took a look at one of Akuri's fingernails, she found traces of spatial magic in them. No normal human should be capable of using spatial magic, but there are records of that kind of magic being used during the Age of Gods. Right now, that's the closest she has come to figuring out Akuri's origins. But while she may look and behave like a normal girl, Akuri is definitely not a human. It honestly terrifies Mimiko that being like Akuri is present in the atelier, so Mimiko is considering putting a sealing curse on her so she can't use teleportation magic anymore and locking her away in a research lab. However, Kurt refuses to let that happen. Mimiko questions why he is so opposed to the idea, so Kurt asks her if she's scared of him. Mimiko knows that Kurt is capable of making deadly weapons if he wanted to, but she also knows Kurt would never do anything to harm others, so she isn't scared of him. In the same way, Kurt tells her that he knows that whether Akuri is a human or not, she would never do anything to hurt him or the others here. She even went to check on the demon woman when they first brought her in, most likely because she was worried about her being unconscious. That just goes to show how kind Akuri is, and not once has she made Kurt or the others feel unsafe, so he won't let Mimiko take her away. Ulysses agrees with Kurt, and since Mimiko couldn't find any proof that she's a monster, they at least know that Akuri isn't dangerous. Lise also doesn't want Mimiko to take Akuri away, and since it's 3 against 1, Mimiko eventually concedes and agrees to let Akuri stay. But there's still one more matter she needs to attend to, so she asks to be taken to the demon that Kurt captured so she can have a little chat with her. Kurt tells her he kept the demon in the second-floor basement, so Mimiko starts heading in that direction, but before she leaves, Kurt asks her not to throw the demon in jail because she didn't really do any harm. Mimiko promises that she'll be lenient with the demon, but in truth, she has no intention of granting mercy because demons are the natural enemies of humanity. Once she finds the demon, she injects her with a drug to wake her up, and once the demon opens her eyes, Mimiko begins asking questions. The first thing the demon does is use fire magic to attack Mimiko. But it's no use because Kurt pre-installed a barrier that negates all magic in this room. Mimiko asks the demon to just comply and answer her questions so she doesn't have to get violent, and the demon recognizes that she has lost, and according to the demon honor code, the loser must obey the wishes of the victor. But Mimiko isn't the one who defeated the demon, so she says she will only answer questions from the boy who bested her, Kurt. Mimiko isn't sure if she should listen to the demon, but bringing Kurt over is quicker than hours of torture, so she goes upstairs and asks him to come down. When Kurt sees the demon, he asks her how she's doing, and she says she feels fine, aside from the fact that her arms are tied behind her back. Kurt apologizes for that, and he would like to let her go, but he has been told not to untie her until they are done talking. The demon tells Kurt that her name is Soulflare, and she asks if he really knows Hildegard. This gets Kurt's attention because he has been wondering what happened to her for ages now, but no one else knows who he is talking about, so Ulysses asks him who this Hildegard person is. Kurt explains that she's the daughter of a trader who often visited Kurt's village, and she was a demon like Soulflare here, so Kurt thinks they might know each other. Soulflare asks Kurt if he recalls Hildegard wearing a griffin pendant, and now that Kurt thinks about it, he did see her with one, and that's enough for Soulflare to believe that Kurt met Hildegard. She pleads with Kurt to help her because she needs to save Hildy, but Kurt has no idea what she's talking about. Soulflare explains that Hildegard is currently being held captive beneath Margrave Tychoon's castle, and Kurt is shocked that Tychoon would do something so horrible, so he asks Ulysses to help him rescue Hildegard. However, Ulysses isn't convinced. Even if Soulflare really just wanted to save Hildegard, that doesn't explain why she targeted Akuri. But there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. She was investigating Tychoon so she could find a way to save Hildegard from his castle, and in the process, she found out that Tychoon was tracking Kurt and his friends, so Soulflare decided to follow Kurt and Ulysses to find out why Tychoon was so interested in them. And that's when she saw Akuri appear out of nowhere. She didn't understand how the teleportation worked, but with that kind of power, she would have been able to rescue Hildegard instantly, so she attempted to kidnap Akuri. That sounds perfectly reasonable to Kurt, but Ulysses warns him not to be so easily persuaded because Soulflare hasn't actually shown any proof yet. Soulflare tells them that if they want proof, then they can look at the pendant she's wearing. However, the pendant is buried deep in her cleavage, so Ulysses has to go fishing for it. Once the pendant is visible, Kurt confirms that it really is the same one Hildegard was wearing, so everything Soulflare said must have been true. Soulflare received this pendant from Hildegard, and the reason she canceled her attack on Ulysses back then wasn't because of Akuri. It was because the dagger that Ulysses borrowed from Kurt had the same griffin symbol as Hildegard's pendant. Kurt recalls that he received that dagger as a gift from Hildegard, so all evidence suggests that Soulflare is telling the truth, so Mimiko decides it's worth looking into. She tells Soulflare that they will save Hildegard for her, but only under the condition that she stays here. And in case she still refuses to take orders from Mimiko, Mimiko asks Kurt to tell Soulflare to stay put. Kurt swears to Soulflare that they will get Hildegard back, but in the middle of their conversation, Akuri suddenly appears in front of Kurt. Kurt scolds Akuri because it's rude to teleport in front of people like that, so Akuri apologizes, but teleporting is a lot of fun for her. Kurt then approaches Mimiko, and even though he was the one who said he wants to save Hildegard, he has no idea how to do it, so he wants her help. Mimiko tells Kurt it's not a problem since everyone is here to help, but Kurt still feels a little down because he can't do anything to assist them. A little while later, Mimiko pulls up some blueprints of Tychoon's mansion so they can figure out where Hildegard might be, and Ulysses is honestly impressed that Mimiko was able to get her hands on Tychoon's floor plan on such short notice. Mimiko has actually been investigating Tychoon for a while now, and according to her agents, there's one room in the mansion that only Tychoon is allowed to enter. He has been seen carrying food into that room, so it is possible that Hildegard was imprisoned in there. Soulflare also took notice of that room when she was spying on Tychoon, but she couldn't get in. Mimiko asked her agents to try opening it, but even a master locksmith would take a few hours to get in. However, if they can't pick the lock, then Lise suggests that they should just make Tychoon unlock it himself. She can use one of her illusions to make it seem like someone managed to sneak into the room, at which point Tychoon would be forced to unlock the door to investigate. That plan sounds pretty good, but they'll need to find a way to trick Tychoon into falling for it. Lisa already thought of that as well, so she intends to have Rikudo host a 3-day festival as the Atelier Master, and that will be the perfect excuse to get close to Tychoon. However, Ulysses wonders what they should do about Kurtz, since she still doesn't trust Soulflare enough to leave Kurt here with her. Lise says they can just bring Kurt with them under the pretense of wanting to see the festival, and when they get their chance, they'll sneak away to save Hildegard. Now that the plan has been finalized, Lise and Ulysses both start fantasizing because going to a festival with Kurt would practically be a date. They'll execute the infiltration plan on the 3rd day of the festival, so there will be 2 days to have fun with Kurt. and they both play a game of rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets to go first. Lise comes out on top, so she starts emoting on Ulysses to rub it in, but Ulysses makes her promise that she won't do any lewd things with Kurt. And both Mimiko and Sulflare are watching in utter confusion. On the first day of the festival, Kurt and Lise head out with Akari, and Lise is having the time of her life. While walking, Lise spots a shop that sells spineless cacti, and it's a unique product since you can cut off the top and drink the cactus juice. Personally, I haven't trusted cactus juice since that one episode of Avatar, but since Lise seems excited to try it, Kurt decides to buy some. He gives one to Akari and the other to Lise, but he didn't buy one for himself. It's not like Kurt is broke because he currently has at least 1 million gold coins in his bank account, but his self-esteem is so low that he doesn't think he deserves to drink a full cactus, so he just asks to get some of the leftovers. Akari feels bad that Kurt didn't get a drink for himself, so she offers to share hers with him, and Kurt is touched by the kind gesture. He tries the cactus juice, and it turns out to be really sweet with no hallucinations. Kurt is really enjoying it, but he doesn't want to finish Akari's juice, so he gives it back to her. Lise then asks Kurt if he would like to try some of her juice, and she was just trying to be nice at first. But then she realizes that Kurt's lips just touched the cactus rim and all the Goomer neurons in her brain activated. She bites down on the spot that Kurt's lips touched, and she then stuffs the cactus in her bag so she can take it home, definitely not for any unholy reasons. Kurt has no idea why she suddenly started acting so strange, so he asks her why she's putting the cactus in her bag, but honestly, he's better off not knowing. They then continue walking through the festival, and Lise recalls that Kurt traveled all over the nation when he was part of that adventuring party, so she's sure Kurt must have seen tons of festivals. And technically she's right, but he was always stuck doing maintenance or guarding the carriage in the stables, so he only ever got to see the festival from a cold, dark room. Lise says that sounds awful, but Kurt says he didn't mind because someone like him who was only good for doing chores didn't deserve to enjoy a festival anyway. However, he has always wanted to properly enjoy a festival, so Lise promises to make today as much fun as possible for Kurt. And when they are done having fun, she will finally confess her feelings to Kurt. The three of them continue walking until a stall owner asks Kurt if he'd like to play a game and stand a chance to win a gift for his lovely wife and daughter. All he has to do is perfectly weigh out 1 kilogram of beans, and normally this would be a near impossible task, but Kurt picks up a handful of beans, and after holding them for a second, he completes the challenge on his first try and wins the prize. After a long day of festival games, Lise asks Kurt to come to the park with her to get away from the crowded festival. She has set up the ideal scenery, and she's sure that Kurt enjoyed himself at the festival today, so he must be in a great mood, and this would be the perfect time to confess. However, when she approaches Kurt, he actually looks really sad. Lise then realizes her mistake because the park has a clear view of Tycoon's castle, and seeing it must have reminded Kurt that Hildegard is trapped in there. She asks Kurt if he's worried about Hildegard, but he says that isn't the problem. Everyone already promised that they would save Hildegard, so he has faith that they'll manage it, but it hurts that he hasn't been able to do anything to help. Lise points out that Kurt saved her from her curse, and he also built that huge mansion for all of them, but Kurt doesn't think any of that stuff matters because he is convinced any random guy could have done the same thing. Lise wants to tell Kurt that his skills far surpass those of normal people, but he probably thinks she's lying to him, so instead, she tells Kurt she loves him. Kurt is shocked to hear that all of a sudden, but Lise really means it, and she's not the only one who feels that way. Ulysses, Mimiko, Sina, and all the others at the atelier all care about Kurt deeply, so he shouldn't feel like he's being a burden on them, just because he can't help save Hildegard. Hearing that cheers Kurt up a lot, but then Kurt calls out to him because she's hungry, so Kurt goes over to get her some food. Lise is a little disappointed because her confession came off as platonic instead of romantic, but she's fine with it since it made Kurt feel better. However, next time she's going to make sure to properly convey her feelings to him. After Ulysses' sword was broken last time, she asked Kurt to make her a new one, so before the festival began, she contacted a famous blacksmith dwarf and went back to that mine that Ulysses owns. In no time, Kurt manages to find some mithril and adamantite just lying around, and the dwarf was shocked by how easy that was for Kurt. But when the time comes to craft the sword, he refuses to believe that Kurt can actually get it done like this. Mithril is notoriously difficult to work with, yet Kurt is basically melting it in a pot like it's nothing. As skeptical as he is, he still agrees to let Kurt use his forge, and to his surprise, Kurt makes a masterpiece of a blade in less than an hour. The blacksmith is stunned for a moment, but once he is done processing what just happened, he decides to go on a journey to hone his blacksmithing skills so he can become as good as Kurt is. Ulysses was really excited to receive the sword since it's the first gift Kurt has given her, and back to the present, it's time for her to go on her date with him. Kurt and Ulysses walk out into town as the second day of the festival begins, and since Akira is still tired from all the fun she had yesterday, they decided to let her sleep in. This works out great for Ulysses since it means she will have Kurt all to herself, and she already has a ton of fun spots she plans to take Kurt to. However, all of a sudden, she hears a commotion, and when she looks over, she sees a father-daughter store getting robbed by some delinquents. Now, Ulysses is perfectly fine with letting them get robbed since she doesn't want to interrupt her date with Kurt, so she pretends not to see anything. But before she knows it, Kurt has already left to help the family. Kurt walks up to the stall and tells the thugs to stop what they are doing immediately. The thugs tell him to mind his own business, but Kurt insists that they explain what's going on here. So the thugs say they don't like how this man's meat buns taste, so they are busting the place up so no one has to taste this trash. Kurt thinks it's rude to call someone's hard work trash, so he picks up one of the meat buns and says he'd like to buy it. He then takes a bite and compliments the man's excellent meat choice and preparation. The thugs don't appreciate Kurt ruining their fun, so the short one shoves him, and Kurt has no combat skills, so he stumbles back a few feet. This is when Ulysses finally decides to step in and tells the thugs that Kurt is part of an atelier. As soon as the thugs hear this, they start having second thoughts because they know ateliers hold a lot of power in the kingdom, so they run off. Kurt then goes to check on the man, and he discovers that the thugs broke a couple of his bones, so he is really worried. Ulysses tries telling Kurt that a few swigs of his medicine should be enough to heal broken bones, but Kurt still believes everything he makes is mediocre, so he insists on taking the man to a hospital and runs off before Ulysses can stop him. She is incredibly disappointed because, at this rate, her date with Kurt is going to be ruined, but she hears the man's daughter start crying and realizes she might be worrying about the wrong thing here. Just then, Ulysses notices one of Mimiko's agents nearby disguised as a melon seller, so she goes over to see if she has any information to give. Long story short, the agent tells Ulysses that there's a cooking competition that's going to be held later this afternoon, and that Meat Bun Stall was planning to enter, but the reigning champion, Gargle Restaurant, doesn't want to lose its title as the best food stall, so they hired thugs to destroy their stall. Ulysses realizes that this means her date was ruined because of Gargle Restaurant's pettiness, but since they've already driven the thugs away, she is sure she can continue her date once Kurt gets back. Unfortunately, the plot needs to happen, so when Kurt returns, he tells Ulysses that the man is going to be in the hospital until tomorrow, so he asks Kurt to look after his shop and daughter for him. Ulysses' chances of a normal date are officially gone, so she decides to channel her frustration into rage and swears she's going to crush the Gargle Restaurant for ruining her plans. Kurt has no idea what Ulysses is talking about, so she explains that there's going to be a cooking competition later today, and she wants to help the Buns stall win. However, the little girl tells her there's no chance of winning the competition anymore because those thugs dumped out all the meat bun paste, so there's none left to sell, let alone enter the competition. Ulysses tells the girl everything is going to be alright because she and Kurt will help her. She asks Kurt if he could make some delicious meat buns, and it's Kurt, so of course he can. But Kurt won't be the one making the buns since his would be too good, so instead, Ulysses plans to have Kurt teach Luna how to make it so she can continue making the buns once they're gone. Luna promises to work hard to make her father proud, so Ulysses gets up and says they are going to remake those buns and win the competition. But first, they'll need to acquire some new ingredients, so she asks Kurt if there's anything he needs her to get. Kurt tells her to go buy some spineless cacti from the stalls nearby, and then she should go get the bag of beans that he won at the festival yesterday. And while she's doing that, he says he will get to work digging right here. Ulysses was on board with everything right up until the point he started talking about digging holes. She reminds Kurt that this plaza belongs to the Lord, but Kurt says it's not a problem since he can dig it fast enough that no one will be inconvenienced. However, that's not what Ulysses was worried about. Kurt then asks if she knows where he could borrow a shovel, but Ulysses insists that he should get permission before doing construction work on someone else's land. On the other side of town, Gargle is treating the judges of the cooking contest to one of his delicious treats, and they are praising him for his exquisite food. Gargle is pleased because he is certain to win this year's cooking contest, partially because he kind of bribed the judges before the contest began, and he already went to great lengths to make sure his rivals were destroyed. However, to his dismay, he soon hears people talking about some delicious buns they just bought, and he is starting to get worried, so he decides to head over there to see what's going on. He is sure he told those thugs to destroy the Buns stall, but to his surprise, he finds out that the stall is not only still there, but its business is better than ever. There's even some sort of new spa structure next to it, and Gargle has no idea when that was built. The judges soon arrive at the stall because they've been hearing a lot of good things about the buns here. Gargle is panicking because he doesn't want the judges to taste those buns, so he tries convincing them that the buns must be rotten because the paste inside them is completely black. However, Luna interrupts him mid-sentence and brings a plate of buns out to the judges. She informs them that while the paste in her buns might be black, it still tastes great regardless. She explains that it was made with boiled beans and ripened cactus nectar, giving it a sweet and savory flavor. Her vivid description gets the judges intrigued, so they are all excited to try some, and as soon as it enters their mouths, they can tell why everyone likes it so much. And as an added bonus, the buns only cost 1 copper each despite being so tasty. Gargle doesn't believe the buns could possibly be that good, so he decides to try one for himself, and he finds out that it really is that good. The judges ask Luna if there is a secret to making the buns so fluffy, so Ulysses comes over and explains that the temporary owner got a little carried away with preparation. He said to get the best result, the buns need to be boiled in water that has baking soda in it. So they use water drawn straight from the hot spring. Gargle refuses to believe it and accuses Ulysses of lying because he knows there's no hot spring here, but Ulysses tells him the temporary owner just dug one today. Gargle still doesn't think it's possible, but then Ulysses tells him that Kurt is part of the new atelier, and it suddenly sounds a lot more believable to him. However, he's still pissed that his chances of winning the cooking contest were ruined by Kurt and Ulysses, so he threatens to report them for building on Tycoon's land without his permission. Even members of an atelier can be punished for such a crime, but Ulysses already thought of that, which is why she asked Lise to go get permission from Tycoon personally. And with the third princess officially backing the stall, there's nothing Gargle can do to stop them. Although they had to agree to surrender the hot spring to city management as part of the deal, so Kurt turned it into a foot spa as a new tourist attraction. Gargle is losing his mind because it shouldn't be possible for a small bun stall to have so many connections. However, he still has one trick up his sleeve, so he pulls one of the judges aside and reminds him of the bribe money he will get if he helps Gargle win the contest. However, the bean buns are simply too delicious, so the judge tells Gargle that he can keep his money because there's no way he's going to give this stall a bad review. Just then, Gargle spots the thugs he hired hiding around the corner, so he runs up to them and says they should hurry up and destroy the stall. He even promises to bail them out if they get thrown in jail, but all of a sudden, he hears a girl's voice and the thugs fade away to reveal Lise. The real thugs have already been arrested and thrown in jail for destruction of property, and Gargle just admitted to hiring them to commit all that destruction, but that alone wouldn't be enough to lock him away for a long time. Fortunately, Ulysses did some digging and found out that Gargle is the supplier for Tycoon's personal chef and has been adding drugs to his food to get people addicted. And that is very much illegal, so they have every right to take him away now. Gargle realizes that he has been caught, but he refuses to go down like this, so he pulls out a knife and lunges at Lise so he can escape. That doesn't go so well for him, and within seconds, he is tackled to the ground by 2 of Mimiko's agents. Ulysses then tells him he just made things a lot worse for himself because Lise over here is the third princess, and attacking her just added treason to his charges. Gargle is then dragged away, and it's crazy to think that all this happened because Gargle wanted to win a stupid contest so badly. Once Gargle is gone, Lise takes a moment to rub it in Ulysses' face that she couldn't have a proper date with Kurt. But Ulysses is just glad she was able to make Luna and Kurt smile today. Later that day, Tycoon is informed that Gargle was arrested, and he is shocked because Gargle was his castle's only food supplier. He asks what Gargle did in hopes of getting him out of jail, but his assistant informs him that Gargle attacked Princess Lise at the festival today, and there's nothing Tycoon can do to save him from that kind of screw-up, so he gives up on getting him released. However, Tycoon still has a major problem because Lise is supposed to come over for tea tomorrow, and how is he supposed to serve the princess if his food supplier is in jail? Tycoon's assistant then comes up with a proposition and suggests that they could hire a local bun stall to make the tea party snacks since they were quite popular during today's festival. Tycoon doesn't have much of a choice, so he agrees to hire the food stall as his new food supplier in preparation for Lise's visit tomorrow. But speaking of Lise, she has been acting rather strange lately. She randomly came to him today and asked for a building permit in person and said she'd be back for tea the next day along with the atelier. Tycoon is worried that she might have figured out what he's doing here, but none of that matters as long as he gets to meet the atelier and convey his deepest wish. The next morning, Lise and the others are getting ready for their plan to rescue Hildegard, and their goal is to get to the secret room behind the kitchen. They don't know for sure that Hildegard is in there, but it's their best guess. Kurt tells everyone that he's going to go help Luna with her stall today since she happened to get a really big order, but it definitely shouldn't affect their plan. Once Kurt leaves, Lise and Ulysses go over the details of the plan, and basically, Lise will create an illusion of herself and Rikudo to meet with Tycoon, and eventually, they will trick him into unlocking the secret room so they can find out what's inside. Or at least that was how it was supposed to go. But on the way there, they get a note from one of Mimiko's spies telling them that Kurt and Luna were hired by Tycoon to cater today's tea party, and he is currently in the kitchen right next to the secret room. Kurt was initially just going to help Luna with the store for the day, but when he arrived that morning, he found her talking to some guards from Tycoon's mansion. They tell her that the Margrave would like to order 100 buns from this store in preparation of a special event he has planned for today, which wouldn't be an issue. But the Margrave also requested to have the chef come to his mansion, and little girl can't afford to leave her shop unattended. Kurt doesn't want her to lose out on today's business, so he offers to make the 100 buns and go to the mansion in her place so she can stay here. And while he's making the buns, he offers a few samples to the guards as thanks for being so polite about the whole thing. The guards are grateful for the treat, so they all dig in, and as soon as they eat the buns, their taste buds are sent to heaven and they pass out from bliss while standing. Luckily, it only takes Kurt a few minutes to finish preparing the 100 buns, so he goes outside and snaps the guards out of it so they can all head to the mansion. Upon arrival, Kurt is shocked to learn that the buns he made are going to be served to the princess of the kingdom, and he still has no idea that Lise is the princess, so he is worried that he might get executed for disrespectfully serving mere buns to royalty. However, the attendant tells him he has nothing to worry about because this was Tycoon's request. He also asks Kurt to wait until the Tycoon's meeting with the princess is over in case either of them want to meet him. Meanwhile, Lisa's meeting with Tycoon has been going well so far, but Ulysses has to stay nearby in case something goes wrong, so she can't go keep an eye on Kurt. She just hopes he doesn't do anything dangerous while she's not there, but as she says this, Kurt is busy thinking about doing something dangerous. He and Akuri are sitting in the kitchen, and he is staring right at the door that is supposedly holding Hildegard captive, so it is hard for him to sit still. Akuri notices that Kurt is behaving strangely, so she asks him what's wrong, and Kurt explains that one of his friends might be behind that door, but it's locked, so it is making him anxious. As soon as Akuri hears this, she offers to take Kurt inside, and before Kurt even has a chance to respond, she grabs onto him and teleports into the room. Kurt is surprised once he realizes that Akuri teleported him past the door because he had no idea she could teleport other people with her. But even though he's already inside the secret room, Kurt doesn't want to mess up Ulysses and Lisa's plan, so he asks Akuri to teleport him back outside. However, Akuri tells him she can't do it, so Kurt assumes there must be some sort of cooldown on her teleportation, meaning he's going to be stuck in here for a while. Just then, Kurt hears a woman's voice from the door next to him, and he believes it might be Hildegard, so he immediately takes out a pin and starts picking the lock. The lock is extremely complicated and was made to be impossible to bypass, but Kurt gets through it quicker than the lock-picking lawyer and opens the door. However, while he does find a woman inside, he can immediately tell that it's not Hildy. It's a really old lady. Back with Taekon's meeting, he says he wants to get right down to business, so he has a request to ask of Rikuto. He asks Lise to step outside since it's a private matter, so the clone leaves the room, but the real Lise is still hidden behind Rikuto, so she is eager to find out what sort of scheme Taekon has up his sleeve. And once Taekon believes he is alone with the supposed atelier master, he asks Rikuto if he knows anything about eternal youth. The old lady is surprised to see a young boy here since she doesn't get many guests, but she's happy to see some new faces. Akure walks up to the woman and asks her if she's sick or something, and the lady tells her that she is. In fact, she hasn't had much of an appetite lately. But then Akure offers her one of the buns that Kurt made, and when the lady eats it, she actually enjoys the food. She is amazed by how good it tastes, especially since her taste buds don't work anymore. Seeing her act so cheerful gives Kurt the impression that she isn't really an old lady. He asks her why she has an old appearance, and the lady is surprised that he could tell so quickly. She assumes Kurt must be some sort of powerful mage, but Kurt tells her he's just a chore boy at an atelier. The lady is surprised to hear that Kurt's position is so low and seems so capable, but regardless, she asks him if he could help her save the demon held captive beneath this room. As soon as Kurt hears Hildegard's name, he says he is going to rescue her, but since Hildy is being held below this room, he's going to need something to dig with. However, he didn't bring any tools with him, so he decides to take this stale piece of bread and carve it into a shovel. The old lady is incredibly confused and thinks Kurt might be crazy or something, so before he goes any farther, she tells him to wait because she knows an easier way to get to the basement. Upstairs, Lisa's surprised to learn that Taekon is after eternal youth, but she needs more information, so she makes Rikuto probe for information. Taekon knows it's not easy to achieve eternal youth, however, races like elves and demons live several times longer than humans do, so there must be a way to recreate the effect and make humans live longer as well. In the past, experiments were carried out to extend human lifespans by implanting elf or demon cells in humans, but those experiments came with heavy side effects and were deemed inhumane, so they were banned in the kingdom altogether. With that said, after everything Tycoon has heard about the medicine the new atelier has produced, he figured that the atelier master might be able to create a drug that can grant a person eternal youth with no side effects. Lise assumes Tycoon must be planning to use cells from Hildegard's body to make his eternal youth experiments, but there's one part that doesn't add up for her, so she uses Rakuto to ask him why he is in such a rush to acquire an eternal youth potion. He isn't exactly at death's door, and he must have known that use of demon cells is against the policies of the nation, that he was willing to potentially risk his status to acquire immortality immediately. Tycoon is asked who he intends to use the immortality potion on if he does acquire it, but Tycoon begins getting defensive and says it doesn't matter who it's for. All that matters is that he needs it. Lise realizes that Tycoon isn't going to reveal that part of his plan, so she decides to move forward with the illusion and creates 2 thieves nearby. Ulysses then comes running in to play along and tells Tycoon that 2 thieves were spotted in the mansion, and they just ran into the kitchen like they were looking for something. Tycoon immediately becomes panicked, so he gets up and asks Ulysses to guard Rakuto and Lise because he needs to go check something. Tycoon then hurries out and rushes toward the secret room, while an invisible Lise follows closely behind. She is sure that Hildegard must be the secret Tycoon is trying to hide, but when Tycoon eventually opens the door, she is shocked when he calls out for someone named Famil. Tycoon is even more panicked when he realizes Famil isn't here, so he worries that the thieves that broke in might have gotten to her. Lise is really confused because Famil is the name of Tycoon's daughter, but Lise thought she was dead. Tycoon runs into the basement to go looking for Famil, and while he's gone, Lise walks up to the bed to do a little investigating. She uses a spell to enhance her senses, and she smells Kurt's scent in this room, but she also found the long gray hair, and she knows it doesn't belong to Kurt, so it must be Famil's. There are too many factors here she hadn't anticipated, so before she does anything else, she plans to head back and discuss this with Ulysses. Meanwhile, Famil has just led Kurt and Akiri to the room where Hildy is being kept, and once Kurt opens the door, he finds Hildy held in a giant magic circle. He calls out to her, and when Hildy opens her eyes, she's shocked to see that Kurt is really here. Kurt tells Hildy to wait a moment while he undoes the magic circle, but Famil tells him that won't be necessary because the magic circle can be turned off from this control switch. Once Hildy has been released, Kurt runs over to check on her and asks if she's hurt anywhere, but Hildy says she's perfectly fine and Kurt is relieved, but then he notices that she looks exactly the same as she did when he met her 10 years ago. He tells her she hasn't changed at all since he last saw her, but then Hildy punches him in the face because it's his fault that she's stuck like this. When Kurt fed her that medicine he made, it made her stop aging entirely, so she's going to be stuck looking like a 10-year-old for the rest of her life. Kurt apologizes because he might have gone a little overboard with the rainbow flower when he made the medicine. But that's not all. Shortly after Kurt did this to her, he just moved out of the village and left her to deal with it on her own. She demands that Kurt make it up to her immediately, but Akiri yells at Hildy for hitting her father. Once Hildy realizes that Kurt has a daughter, she gets even angrier because Kurt went and had a child with someone else while leaving her like this. Kurt tells her it's a misunderstanding because while Akiri may be his daughter, he hasn't done any actual baby making. She just came out of an egg he was taking care of. That sounds absurd, but Hildy has seen the kind of things that go on in Kurt's village, so it's not hard for her to believe. Anyway, Hildy is really hungry, so she asks Kurt if he has anything to eat. But the only food Kurt came with is this hard piece of bread. Hildy tells Kurt it's fine, but when Kurt said the bread is hard, he really meant it because Hildy can't even bite down on it. Just then, Famil walks up to Hildy and asks her if it's true that Kurt is the one who made the medicine that gave her eternal youth, and Hildy confirms it. She asks Kurt if he could make the same medicine again for Famil, but unfortunately, the drug requires rainbow flowers, and Kurt hasn't seen any of those flowers in a long time. That's disappointing to hear, so Hildy apologizes to Famil for not being able to help with her condition, but Famil tells her it's not her fault. Kurt is shocked when he hears Hildy called the old lady Famil because he recognizes the name as that of Tycoon's daughter, but everyone knows Tycoon's daughter is dead. Famil explains that her death was fake to keep her condition hidden, and Tycoon has been shedding tears as he watched his daughter age rapidly with each passing day, but since Kurt could already tell that she wasn't really an old lady, she doesn't see any reason to go into depth with an explanation. However, Kurt is an idiot when it comes to picking up on clues, so he has no idea what Famil is talking about. Famil continues talking, but Kurt isn't paying attention because he's trying to figure out what Famil meant, so he goes over the details. Tycoon was greatly saddened by watching Famil age day after day, and he imprisoned an eternally youthful Hildegard in this secret room. The conclusion seems obvious, but then Kurt remembers a conversation he had with the members of Sakura, and when he asked them if they knew why Tycoon might have imprisoned Hildy, Cans jokingly said maybe it was some sort of kink thing. Kurt disregards all other theories and decides that Cams must be right. A moment later, Taekon shows up, and he is relieved to see that Famil is alright. He then notices Kurt and asks him if he's the thief that broke in here, but Kurt denies it and changes the subject, telling Taekon that what he's doing here is wrong. Taekon gets defensive and tells Kurt he wouldn't understand, but then Kurt accuses him of getting tired of Famil because she grew old and going after Hildy instead because she's young, and everyone realizes that Kurt really doesn't understand a single thing about what's going on. Kurt then accuses Taekon of being attracted to kids, but Taekon cuts him off right there because he may have done some unethical things like kidnapping Hildy for his daughter's sake, but he is absolutely not into kids. However, once Kurt starts making up a narrative in his head, all logic goes out the window. Everyone is confused and wonders how Kurt could have possibly come to that conclusion, but to convince Taekon to stop being attracted to kids, Kurt asks him to remember what it was like when Famil was first born, and Taekon does have fond memories of that day. Famil was the precious treasure that he and his late wife, Farnard, cared for. From that day, he swore that he would live his life for Famil's sake, even if it meant giving his life up for her. Kurt is about to speak again, but before he can say anything more, Hildy hits Kurt with a paralyzed spell to shut him up. She then asks Famil if she's sure she wants to go through with this after everything Taekon just said. But while Famil still cares about her father, she is certain that this is what she wants, so she asks Hildy to kill Taekon. Taekon runs out to the secret room because he doesn't want to die without first finding a way to save Famil. But as soon as he steps outside, he is confronted by Lise and Ulycia. Lise tells Taekon that she knows what he's trying to do, and she knows that Famil has been afflicted with the aging syndrome. There is no known cure for the aging syndrome, and even if the curse is somehow broken, the victim won't return to their original age, which is why Taekon was trying to create a drug to stop Famil from aging and further using Hildy's demon cells. Taekon admits that everything he has done was to make sure Famil would stop aging so rapidly that even though he has done everything that man told him to do, he hasn't found the secret to eternal youth, and he isn't any closer to breaking Famil's curse either. And now everyone is trying to get in his way, so if this is what things have come to, then he is willing to sacrifice his soul to summon a demon that can help Famil. Taekon throws a magic crystal to the ground which activates a circle that was inscribed onto the floor ahead of time. Taekon calls for the demon to come forth, but strangely, nothing happens. Taekon is baffled since he knows he set everything up correctly, and as soon as he activated the magic circle, it should have drawn power from the magic ley lines beneath the castle to summon a powerful demon. However, once Lise hears him mention the ley lines, she informs him that when the hot spring was constructed yesterday, it diverted the flow of those magic ley lines since Kurt went a little too far with his digging. Taekon is shocked because he thinks Lise planned all of this ahead of time just to stop him from summoning the demon, but in reality, it was just a coincidence. Just then, Hildy comes out of the secret room, and Taekon begins to panic because he knows what she's here to do. Once Lise and Ulycia see her, they realize she must be Kurt's friend, so they ask her where he is, but Hildy says she's just made him rest a little down there because she doesn't want him to see what she's about to do. Hildy then draws her sword and points it at Taekon, which shocks Ulycia and Lise, so they ask her if she intends to kill Taekon. Hildy says she has to kill Taekon because while his actions may be to save his daughter, if his desperation continues to grow, he may one day successfully summon a demon. And if that were to happen, then his soul won't be the only one lost. Taekon says he just wants to make sure Famil can live a normal life, no matter the cost, but that's exactly why Famil asked Hildy to kill him, because she would never be able to bear guilt of him putting others in danger just to save her. Hildy is about to stab Taekon, but all of a sudden, Famil comes out and yells for her to stop. Everyone turns to her, and to their utter surprise, Famil is back to normal, and she says she was cured by the buns Kurt made. That's a phrase Taekon never thought he would hear, but he's not going to complain because he's just glad that she has been cured. Meanwhile, down in the basement, the paralysis spell Hildy put on Kurt is starting to wear off, so he's able to talk a little now, but he still can't move his body, so he's going to need a bit of Akuri's help. Kurt asks her to reach into his bag and pull out the bottle he has in there, so Akuri does so, and then Kurt asks her to feed him one of the pills in that bottle. Once Akuri feeds him the pill, Kurt regains full control over his body, so he is ready to go help upstairs, even though he still doesn't understand the situation at all. Meanwhile, upstairs, Taekon is still embracing Famil, but Lise gets his attention because there's still a lot to discuss regarding what just happened. Taekon already knows what's coming, so he turns to Lise and says he is ready to accept whatever punishment she has in store for him. Lise tells Taekon that he attempted to summon a demon and also imprisoned a demon without permission, both of which are serious crimes even for a noble like him, so he would likely face imprisonment or even execution for his actions. Famil speaks up and pleads for Lise to reconsider because she says Taekon isn't a bad person. Everything he did was for her sake, so if someone must be punished, Famil asks to be punished in place of her father. However, Lise tells them that she doesn't actually intend to punish anyone. As a member of the royal family, it is her job to report things like what Taekon has done, but then again, since he was only doing it out of love for his daughter, Lise is willing to pretend that none of this ever happened as long as Taekon promises to work for the good of the atelier from now on. Taekon is grateful that Lise is showing him mercy and agrees to her demands, so now all they need to do is get Kurt to erase the demon's summoning circle, so they can put this whole mess behind them, but before they could do that, a man shows up and tells them they won't be getting a happy end. Hildy recognizes him as a man named Scripter, and Taekon says he's the one who brought Hildegard to him and taught him how to draw the summoning circle. Scripter thought that once the demons allied with Hildy found out she was in Taekon's castle, they would attack and start a war in search of her. But to his disappointment, none of them took any aggressive action. Hildy says she warned all her allies ahead of time not to start fights with the humans because she knew Scripter might try to do something like this, and it looks like the warning paid off. Scripter hates how all of his plans for chaos have been failing recently. He even went through so much trouble to trick the bishop of the Poland church into trying to assassinate Lise, but his script was disrupted by someone's interference. And now his plans are being ruined again, although he isn't quite sure how they managed to dispel the aging curse he put on Famil. As soon as Taekon hears those words, he realizes the Scripter is the one who cursed his daughter, and he is so enraged that he immediately attacks Scripter, but his punch is stopped by a force field surrounding him. Ulysses joins in on the attack, but the force field stops her slash as well. However, since Kurt was the one who made her sword, it qualifies as a holy weapon and possesses so much power that it begins to crack Scripter's shield. Scripter is shocked because he hadn't expected to come across someone wielding a holy sword, so he is going to have to retreat soon. But before he leaves, he has one final trick to play, so he pulls out a small vial with some black liquid. As soon as Hildy sees the bottle, she yells for everyone to take that bottle from Scripter at all costs because it's bad news. Unfortunately, it was already too late as Scripter managed to dump the black liquid on the summoning circle, which led to its activation. The demon is now being summoned, and as luck would have it, it turns out to be the same greater demon that attacked them before. Ulysses doesn't understand how it is still alive because she's sure that she killed it last time. The demon tells her that demons are spiritual beings, so it's very difficult to actually kill him. But he will admit that the being defeated last time cost him several centuries worth of his magic reserves. Lise tries pulling out her magic sword while the demon is distracted, but the demon is already aware of what that sword can do, so he knocks it out of her hand before she can use it. Hildy launches a fireball at the demon, and Ulysses charges in with her holy sword while Lise begins casting some light magic. However, before either of them could complete their attacks, the demon shoots them in the arm with arrows of dark energy. Ulysses can't believe he was able to react to their attacks despite getting hit by Hildy's fireball, but the demon tells her spells like that are useless against his magic barrier. The only thing here that could have actually hurt him is that holy sword, but with Ulysses' arm injured, she can't use it anymore. And since the demon exhausted a lot of his magic reserves the last time he was summoned, he plans to replenish those reserves by making the humans suffer at his hand, which will cement his superiority over them into their minds and restore his magic. However, that also means that if Lise and Ulysses are able to shake the demon's confidence, he will lose power and disappear. But that's a lot easier said than done when he's currently twisting the arrows in their shoulders. Lise tries her best to hide her pain so the demon won't benefit from her suffering, but she's not going to last long at this rate. The demon is happily watching Lise and Ulysses struggling to keep a straight face, but all of a sudden, Kurt shows up, and he seems pretty calm after seeing the demon lord, almost a little too calm. He says it has been ages since he last saw one, so he had thought they all went extinct, but then again, it's never easy to get rid of pests completely. Provocative insults like calling the demon an insect are a good way to rattle its confidence, but Kurt isn't calling the demon a pest to be insulting. Back in his village, he had to deal with demon lords often, so he genuinely sees the demon as nothing more than an inconvenient insect. The demon is offended that Kurt would dare to talk to him like that, so he launches a fireball at him. However, before the fireball could hit Kurt, Akuri teleports it away and makes it hit the demon instead. Kurt thanks Akuri for helping him, but she won't be able to use her teleportation for a while now. So Ulysses is going to have to protect Kurt instead. She gets in front of him, and as the demon launches another fireball at Kurt, she prepares to use the magic slash technique. She failed to execute it against Soulflare a few days ago, but this time, for Kurt's sake, she can afford to fail. Ulysses' sword makes contact with the spell, and she attempts to slash it, but she once again fails to pull it off. However, because she is using the sword Kurt made, something else happens and the demon's flames are absorbed into the blade. Ulysses isn't sure what just happened, but she just goes with it and shoots the fire back at the demon. The demon is starting to lose its composure because it is getting overwhelmed, but even if he is going to be defeated, he's going to take one of them with him. So uses his special move and uses its arms to stab Hildy through the chest. Or at least that's what he wanted to do, but when he hit her, his arms crumbled to pieces. The demon asks how this could be possible because nothing should be hard enough to block its attack. But then Hildy pulls out that loaf of bread that Kurt made earlier. And I'm not sure if it's a good thing, but Kurt somehow made it so hard that it could probably survive the heat death of the universe. That sounds completely absurd, but the demon then realizes that this isn't the first time he has experienced something like this, so he asks Kurt if he happens to be from the Haas village. And as soon as Kurt confirms it, the demon goes nope and disintegrates because he doesn't want to deal with the crazy things Kurt is capable of. After the demon is gone, Kurt explains to the others that for some reason, his village was often attacked by demon lords, so they had to make all sorts of countermeasures against them, and eventually all the demon lords died out. Considering the fact that a piece of bread Kurt made was able to block a demon's ultimate attack, Ulysses can't imagine what kind of countermeasures the people of Kurt's village were able to come up with. Everything is wrapped up quite nicely so far, but just then, a black circle appears in the middle of the magic circle, and it starts trying to pull things in. Hildy tells everyone that the effects of the drug that Scripter used must have worn off, but none of them know what it means. Hildy explains that that black goo that Scripter poured on the summoning circle was a drug that allows the activation of magic circles without an immediate need for mana or souls. However, once the circle's function is over, the goo begins collecting to fulfill the energy requirements. And considering the summoning circle that was used, this one likely won't stop until it has gathered roughly 100 souls worth of energy. The worst part is that there's nothing they can do to stop it without sacrificing people, and at this rate, it's going to take the souls of everyone in the castle. Just then, one of the castle attendants walks in carrying a box full of the buns that Kurt made, and it just so happens that there are 100 of them in there, so the goo devours those instead and simply leaves afterwards. But the attendant arriving with those buns wasn't just a coincidence. It was actually Bandana who sent him to get Kurt's buns and go there. She had a hunch that those buns would be enough to satisfy the goo, but it's actually terrifying when you think about it because if Kurt's buns can be used as sacrifices, then he could technically summon as many demon lords as he wants and force them to obey his command. But Kurt would never actually do something like that. In other news, after the events of that night, Keikam announced the survival of Famil to the people, and they were all overjoyed to learn that she is alright. After a brief interrogation by Mimiko, Hildy and Solflare were released and returned to their homeland together. And as for the bun stall, it has been doing really well along with the hot spring that Kurt made. Just as Bandana expected, the more people know about Kurt, the more he influences the world, so she's going to have to keep a closer eye on him. Later on, Kurt and the others returned to the atelier, and it looks like Kurt was given the title of a knight for his actions. Sina asked him how the commendation ceremony went, and Kurt tells her he was really nervous the whole time. In the first place, he doesn't think he should have even gotten any recognition because Lise and Ulysses are the ones who actually defeated the demon, or at least that's what he believes. However, Takon was well aware that Kurt was the hero who saved them that day, so he gave Kurt the honorary knight title. Ulysses was also given the title of a baroness, and the atelier is now officially under Tycoon's protection, so no nobles can touch them. Meanwhile, as Hildy and Solflare are traveling, she looks at the present Kurt gave her before she left. He wanted to give her a rainbow flower, but those are still extinct, so instead he made her a flower out of orichalcum. Hildy is shocked when she realizes that Kurt made her a gift out of one of the most valuable metals on the planet, but Kurt doesn't think it's that strange. Hildy can't believe she made such a stupid face in front of him, but she's still glad she got to talk to him since this is the first time they've seen each other in over 1,000 years. Seriously, that means that even though Kurt is over a millennia old, and if he hasn't learned common sense by now, there's no hope for him. Back at the atelier, they are holding a party to celebrate, but Kurt notices that Rikudo isn't touching his food at all, so he goes over to ask if something is wrong. Lise can't let Kurt find out that Rikudo is an illusion, but she also doesn't want Kurt to keep thinking of himself as nothing but a chore boy. So she makes Rikudo say he's going on a journey to the royal capital, and while he's away, he is officially appointing Kurt as the new atelier master. As expected, Kurt doesn't think he deserves such a title, but everyone already planned for this, so they trick him into thinking it's a common thing, so Kurt ends up going along with it. The end.